When the apocalypse arrived, my delicate sister-in-law got her period and cried and made a scene, forcing me to go out and buy baby diapers. I tried to persuade her that with the cold snap approaching, everyone was worried about their own safety, and she shouldn't act like a spoiled child, but I was mercilessly pushed out of the door by the whole family. I ran for 3 hours against the strong wind and heavy snow. I had to return empty-handed when my car ran out of gas, however. My brother refused to open the door for me. "Don't even think about coming in until you buy the diapers for my wife and baby," he said. My mother avoided my gaze. "Go and look again. Maybe you'll find them if you put in more effort," she said. My father was even more straightforward. "You're so stubborn, you'll be more obedient if you freeze to death," he snapped, as they wished. I froze to death outside the door in the temperature of -40°C. And they used my death to force the relevant authorities to come and collect the body, and by the way, they got the cold-resistant supplies that they had refused to stockpile. "You just lost a sister, but the baby almost ran out of diapers," they said. I died with my eyes wide open, while they, as a family, lived comfortably and happily. Then, when I opened my eyes again, I found myself back on the eve of the apocalypse. "Since you all tolerate my sister-in-law so much, this time, you can deal with her on your own." 1. The baby wants grandma. The baby wants grandma. Sister-in-law, make milk for the baby. When my delicate sister-in-law pouted and stomped her feet at my mother, demanding milk, the TV screen happened to show a breaking news broadcast. The city has issued a red low temperature warning. The temperature will continue to drop in the next 3 days, with a maximum drop of nearly 40 degrees. Please, citizens, make preparations in advance for cold protection and freezing resistance. All major storage supermarkets in the city have provided. Seeing the striking date on the news, I was sure that I had been reborn. I was reborn on the night before the arrival of the low-temperature apocalypse. At this moment, I hadn't been driven out of the house yet, nor had I been unable to knock on that closed door in the swirling snow. I hadn't curled up in a corner, watching my life slip away from my fingertips little by little as I shivered and stiffened. My life had been restarted, and I could make all new choices. Just as my eyes were heating up and I was on the verge of crying, with a click, the TV was suddenly turned off. My chubby nephew, Max, angrily rammed his big head into my mother's stomach. "Mom, the baby wants milk. Hurry up and make milk for Mom and the baby. If you make the baby hungry, wait for Dad to come back and scold you to death." My mother still maintained her usual posture. She was in so much pain from being hit that cold sweat broke out on her forehead, but she meekly agreed. Then she turned her pleading eyes to me. The cautious helplessness in her eyes coincided with the way she had avoided my outstretched hand when I begged for help in my previous life. 2. In my previous life, when I was locked outside the door and the strong wind and heavy snow had already drained my strength to even open my mouth, I saw my mother standing on the balcony and looking down. I waved my hand at her desperately, like clutching at a straw, trying to call for help. After all, if she hadn't knelt on the ground and tearfully begged me to make that trip, I wouldn't have been locked outside just because I couldn't buy the diapers my sister-in-law wanted. But at that time, she had looked at me with the same eyes full of bitterness and pain, never once thinking of opening the door for me. She watched as my hope gradually turned into despair, and finally, I died little by little right in front of her. She mercilessly drew the curtains and let my father call the relevant authorities for help. I, who was frozen to death outside the door after being refused entry, became a poor soul who had failed to find supplies and finally froze to death outside. The relevant authorities not only sent people to collect my body but also delivered enough supplies to last the whole family through the winter. I died with great resentment, but they were having hot pot and drinking beer. One person's life was exchanged for the survival of a whole family. Nina's life was quite valuable, they said. My delicate sister-in-law pouted. "You just lost a sister. But the baby almost didn't have any diapers to use," she said. My brother gulped down a large mouthful of beer. "The baby won't be wronged. Nina had a high-value accident insurance. We can buy a Hermes for the baby then." My father's eyes lit up. "Yes, that's right. It's a 3 million yuan insurance coverage. It's enough for us to buy a bigger house. It's all thanks to your mother's thoughtfulness. She made Nina buy insurance for everyone in the family. Now we can achieve a class leap. Aren't you going to thank your mother? Your mother is the great hero of our family. For the sake of the future big house, the class leap, and the great hero," they raised their glasses to celebrate, full of joy and harmony. Throughout the whole process, my mother had been smiling as she cooked meat for her son and picked up food for her grandson. She didn't show the slightest bit of guilt. It was only when it was late at night and everything was quiet that she looked at my photo and said indifferently, "It was you who gave up on your mother first. Your mother always has to make plans for your brother and your nephew. Now, they all appreciate me, and I've become the great hero of the family. Nina, since your mother gave birth to you, you should give everything for your mother." It turned out that the cruelty of an otherwise honest person was truly terrifying. This time, her tears couldn't move me anymore, and the knife that should have been wielded at her should fall on her squarely, and she should bear it all alone. 3. Mom, why are you looking at me like that? My sister-in-law asked you to make milk powder for her. Not to mention, my sister-in-law is the apple of my brother's eye. Even if you have any opinions about her, you should tolerate and give in to her for my brother's sake. Making milk powder is neither tiring nor difficult. There's no need to shirk it if you can't be a reasonable mother-in-law. How can our family be peaceful? In my previous life, whenever Sherry made unreasonable demands on me arrogantly and I refused, causing chaos in the family, my mother would always say such things to me. As a result, I was hated by the whole family, while she became a hero by scolding me. No, I've thrown it all back at her, and it really surprised her. Nina, what about me, you old hag? Didn't Dad say we should take good care of Mom and the baby? If you don't make milk for Mom, are you trying to starve her to death, you bad old woman? I hate you, my 5-year-old mama's boy. Max was tall and sturdy, reaching up to my mother's chest. He was usually so spoiled by my father that he looked down on everyone except his parents. With 2 pushes of his hands, my mother fell to the ground, and her palm landed on Max's toy. The sharp corner cut her hand, and blood gushed out. When Max saw that he had caused trouble, he immediately sat on the ground and started rolling around, crying and shouting, "Grandma is bullying me! Grandma is bullying me! Grandpa, save me! Grandpa, save me!" My father, who had been lying in the small room picking his feet and watching videos, immediately jumped out of bed, rushed out, and picked up Max. He cursed at my mother. "Are you acting up again, you useless old woman? Do you want a beating? Who told you to make my precious grandson cry? You're still trying to lose all your dignity in front of your children and grandchildren at your old age." He kicked her in the chest. My mother covered her bleeding hand, and tears fell from her eyes, but as if she didn't have a mouth of her own, she refused to speak. She just looked at me with a hesitant expression. She was trying to make me step in again. I haven't forgotten how I died. I immediately lowered my head and started playing with my phone, not even giving her a glance. At this moment, my delicate sister-in-law started making a fuss again. "The baby wants milk. Why isn't there any milk yet? The baby is starving to death. My husband and brother will beat you all up." I suppressed the sneer at the corner of my mouth and shouted at my mother, "Your precious grandson's mother wants milk. What are you standing there for? Hurry up." My mother was stunned and looked at me in disbelief. After all, according to the normal sequence of events, I should have taken that kick from my father for her, and I should have slapped my delicate sister-in-law for her unreasonable behavior. But in this life, I won't be someone else's pawn. Even the poisonous milk powder that almost killed me, she should make it herself. For, in my previous life, I went to make milk powder for Sherry for my mother. As a result, Sherry had a stomachache because she drank expired milk powder. My delicate sister-in-law's limited edition pink Doraemon panties were soiled, and she cried and made a scene, refusing to let it go. Auntie sister poisoned the baby. The baby's bottom is uncomfortable. The baby is in so much pain, she wailed. My doting brother, in order to calm his wife down, hid my car keys, forced me to stay at home, and made me wash his wife's panties. Naturally, I refused. My father searched out all the cash in my bag and gave it to Sherry as compensation. He also agreed to pay her 20,000 yuan in mental compensation on my behalf, which I would have to pay back slowly in the future. My dear nephew, feeling sorry for his baby mother's grievance, poured a large cup of boiling water on me when I wasn't looking. "Mommy's baby's delicate skin is all red. You evil woman should pay for it," he said. "When I grow taller, I'll pour it on your face." Enduring the searing pain, I slapped Max so hard that his nose bled. Then I grabbed a kitchen knife and intimidated my father and brother, who were about to fight with me. "Whoever dares to touch me, I'll take their life," I roared. "I'm done with this shitty family. I'm never coming back. Give me my car keys. I'm going to the hospital and calling the police to arrest you bastards who imprisoned me illegally." My father and brother initially didn't take me seriously and wanted to laugh at me for pretending to be tough and not being able to back it up, but when I slashed at my brother's inner thigh with a knife in front of them, they panicked. If my mother hadn't pulled me away in time, my brother might have become sisters with his delicate wife for the rest of his life. Seeing that I was angry and had lost my temper, they were trembling and about to take out the car keys, but my mother stopped them. "Nina, be a good girl. It's not a big deal. If we make a big fuss about it, it won't look good. In the end, I'll be the one in a difficult position," she said. "Going to the hospital is just a waste of money. Mom has experience. Just put some medicine on it, and it will definitely go away. Besides, it's the rush hour after work, and the roads are blocked everywhere." You won't be able to get through. Listen to Mom. When your sister-in-law gets better, Mom will stand up for you and scold her severely. Today is your birthday, and it's also the day Mom suffered to give birth to you. For Mom's sake, can you sit down and have a meal before you leave?" She cried so bitterly that she held the blade of the knife with her palm. In the pool of blood, she looked at me tearfully. Behind her, my father had already clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. I was sure that if I left, he would beat my mother half to death as soon as I was out of sight. I hated my mother for being so spineless, but after all, she gave me life. I didn't want her to die on my birthday. My soft heart made me stay, but instead of waiting for my mother to stand up for me, I waited for Sherry to get her period the next night and blame me for it. 5. The baby is vomiting blood because of the auntie sister. The auntie sister should go and buy the baby's diapers, Sherry cried. It was snowing heavily outside, and the temperature had dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. Of course, I didn't want to die, so I refused. Didn't you see what the news broadcast said? In this extreme low temperature weather, people can freeze to death. If you're so good at talking, why don't you go yourself? If you don't have the ability to go, shut up and stop acting like a spoiled lady. My father scolded me, and my brother tried to hit me, but I resisted them all. In the end, my mother knelt down in front of me with a thud and kowtowed to me. "Nina, for the sake of family peace, just do it for Mom. Go and buy it," she pleaded. "If it wasn't for the postpartum illness I got when giving birth to you, and I can't stand the wind, I would have gone myself. I'm also afraid that if I die on the road in this cold weather, I'll cause you trouble." Her half-pleading and half-threatening words left me with no choice. I drove out and searched in the heavy snow and cold snap, but I couldn't find any open stores. I knew that if I couldn't buy Sherry's diapers, the family wouldn't let me off easily, so I drove straight back to my rental house. But when I got to the door, I found that my door key had already been removed by those heartless people. I called the locksmith and the rescue service, but all I got was being called crazy or being told to go to a relative's house to take shelter. After all, the temperature was already -10 degrees. And the snow had covered the roads. Who would risk their life for the money of opening a lock? I had no choice. When the car's fuel was almost exhausted and the temperature was approaching -30 degrees, I could only go back to my parents' house, but that passage to survival was never opened again. I was frozen to death in their indifference, and it all started with this cup of milk powder. My father rushed downstairs in a hurry to buy lollipops to coax his grandson. My mother, still under the tears of my delicate sister-in-law and the shouting from my brother's video call, went to make milk powder with a bleeding hand. Seeing that this was the best time to escape, I stood up without hesitation. Today is Mom's suffering day, and I did prepare a gift. It's in the car, and I'm going to get it now, I said. Sherry pouted. The baby also wants a gift. What gift did the auntie sister buy for the baby? If there's no gift for the baby, my husband and brother will hit you, she threatened. My eyes flashed. Yes, there's a big surprise waiting for you, and all of you, I replied. 6. Using the excuse of changing clothes, I quickly entered my mother's bedroom without hesitation. I took the keys and cash from the drawer and rushed downstairs without looking back. In this life, if they want to die, they can die. I'm going to live a good life. At the elevator entrance, I even bumped into my father. He was about to scold me again, but I quickly covered his mouth. Your grandson fell and hit his head, and it's bleeding badly. He's crying and asking for lollipops. Hurry up and save him. If it's too late, there will be a life-threatening situation. I lied. He was so anxious that his face turned pale. He didn't care about anything else and rushed into the elevator, pressing the buttons so hard that they almost smoked. I also quickly got into my car, drove out of the community without looking back, and headed for the largest storage supermarket in the city. But my mother's phone kept ringing like crazy. I turned on the do not disturb mode, and then she started sending me crazy messages. "Nina, are you not feeling well today? Why are you so cold to Mom? The meal is already cooked. Why did you just leave like that? I made a lot of your favorite braised shrimp in oil. Your father said I spoiled you too much. His kick didn't hurt at all. Don't be angry anymore. Come back and have a meal," she messaged. I took a deep breath and replied to her, "I'm allergic to shrimp. Braised shrimp in oil is what my brother likes to eat. You are the one who got kicked. If you don't feel the pain, why should I care? Enjoy your life of getting beaten. I won't accompany you anymore." In my previous life, I felt sorry for my mother, who was like a hardworking old ox, serving my irritable father and then taking care of my brother's family, who seemed like they hadn't been weaned. I always stood in front of her without hesitation in the face of her sad eyes, fighting with my angry father, arguing with my doting brother, and even fighting with my ungrateful nephew, but in return, she always stood in front of them and played the role of a peacemaker. 7. "Your father didn't do it on purpose, that's just his personality, don't argue with him," she would say. "Your brother is very tired after a day's work, be a good girl and don't pick on him," she would persuade. "Max is just a child and doesn't understand things. As an aunt, you shouldn't be so bothered with him," she would reason. After protecting her to the end, I became the black sheep of the family that everyone hated. My father said that I had wasted all my education, lacking even the basic sense of filial piety, and that it would have been better to give birth to a piece of char siu than to have me. My brother said that I had XYY syndrome combined with rabies, biting everyone I saw, and that I deserved to be unloved by my parents. My delicate sister-in-law and little nephew even spread the word everywhere that I was competing with children for food, drinks, and family property, and that I preferred to be an unmarried old woman rather than let go of anyone in the family. When I was isolated and helpless, being criticized by everyone, the mother I had protected never stood up to defend me. Instead, she joined them in scolding me. "What they said isn't wrong. You really should control your temper," she said. "Nina, can't you be more sensible and stop making things difficult for your mother?" she pleaded. "If it weren't for having you as an unplanned child, your father and I wouldn't have lost our jobs. Your brother's current difficulties are largely because of you. You should take responsibility for him," she blamed. At first, I thought she was just submissive and had long lost her own personality, which was why she was willing to be a servant-like figure in the family. Later, I gradually realized that she always sought the recognition of the whole family by stepping on me. A housewife who had never received respect or attention in the family finally, through joining forces with them and attacking me, the only weak one, gained a tiny sense of achievement and the recognition and praise she took pride in. These little bits of praise and approval made her, who was humble to the core, experience the feeling of being valued, making her willing to indulge in it and even go to greater lengths. In the end, she even cost me my life. The servility of sacrificing her whole life for her husband and son was deeply ingrained in her bones, so much so that she was willing to use and sacrifice her own daughter. Even the Buddha couldn't save such a person. In my previous life, my tragic death repaid her for giving birth to and raising me. In this life, she deserves to bear the consequences of her own actions. I closed the dialogue box, turned on the navigation, and drove straight to the largest storage supermarket in the city. Since I had already escaped, I definitely had to seize the opportunity and stockpile enough supplies. Fortunately, the news announcement had just come out, and the current temperature of over 30 degrees Celsius was making people feel like they were being baked. The news about the approaching cold snap seemed like a joke in comparison. Few people really took the matter of stockpiling supplies to heart. This gave me, a person with a small stature, a lot of room for shopping on the way. I hired 2 large vans and asked the drivers to help me move and unload the supplies together. Most people in the storage supermarket were laughing at me. "It's 36 degrees Celsius, and people are almost melting." She actually believes the weather forecast that there will be a big drop in temperature. She's moving food and daily necessities cart by cart. Is she a patient who escaped from a mental hospital? They sneered. Exactly. And she's buying so much rice and noodles. "I wonder if the salt she hoarded 10 years ago has been finished yet," they mocked. Amidst the burst of laughter, I walked into the next area without looking back. "Laugh all you want, I'll laugh when you cry." I bought a small generator, 2 heaters, several down jackets, and of course, plenty of quilts and cotton shoes. The most important thing was food. I didn't know how long this cold snap would last, so I stocked up as much as possible. I bought boxes and boxes of chicken, duck, fish, and meat. I also bought as much rice, noodles, cooking oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar as I could. Finally, canned food, compressed biscuits, and a large quantity of alcoholic beverages and soft drinks filled the whole van. I had no choice but to call for 2 more vans. I also stocked up a van full of hygiene products and medicine. In the end, as a meat lover, I bought a whole van of various dried meats and 2 boxes of hot pot base. I even bravely bought 2 boxes of Muyang King durians, which I usually couldn't afford. At this time, the supermarket hadn't started implementing quantity restrictions yet. I knew that the big drop in temperature overnight would make the world panic the next day. Even the prices of goods would double or even increase more, so I had to stock up on everything I needed before the large crowd started to act. From 6 o'clock in the evening to 1 o'clock in the morning, my 80 square meter house was already filled with supplies. I arranged them in categories, and almost all the daily necessities I needed were there. If I used them sparingly, just for myself, it would probably last for several years. The 100,000 yuan in cash that my mother took from me under the pretext of saving money for me had only 20,000 yuan left after she spent it. And it all became food in the living room, and a large amount of money, tens of thousands of yuan. was also swiped from my salary card, which I had prepared for the down payment of a house, and was exchanged for life-saving supplies. Although the money in my bank card was flowing out rapidly, I wasn't distressed. After all the hard work, it was finally used for myself, so it wasn't a waste. Moreover, if there really was a day when the cold snap passed, with the accident insurance I bought for the whole family, if they could use my death to buy a house, why couldn't I use their insurance money to buy a big villa? As long as you have a ruthless enough mindset, you can have a villa by the sea, an eye for an eye. I'm waiting to see their end. After being busy until 2 o'clock at night, I finally sat on the sofa and took a breath. Only then did I take out my phone and find that my whole family had called me dozens of times, 8, maybe because no one answered. They sent hundreds of voice messages in the family group. At the top was my father's message. After he got home and found that his grandson was safe and sound, he realized that I had tricked him. He crazily cursed me, saying that I had cursed his grandson to fall and that I would die a bad death. After cursing dozens of times without getting a response, it was my brother's turn. He questioned me if I had secretly changed the milk powder for his delicate wife and baby, causing his wife and baby to have diarrhea. He asked me to go back and bring baby antidiarrheal medicine for his wife and baby, and also buy 2 cups of pearl milk tea that his wife and baby liked, without the tea, as an apology gift. After sending dozens of messages and seeing that I still didn't respond, he cursed that if I died outside, he wouldn't collect my body and then stopped messaging. It was my mother who sent me dozens of private messages. It was still the same old tune dash. Do you really want to make things so difficult for your mother before you're satisfied? Come back and apologize to everyone, and let's have a good birthday celebration. Then she detailed all the hardships she had endured over the years, for example, how she had worked so hard to carry my brother in her arms and me in her womb at the same time, taking care of all the food and clothing for the whole family, how she had faced great pressure and insisted on giving birth to me, an unplanned child, and became a sinner in the eyes of my grandmother and father. Finally, how she had treated me so well with all her heart, providing for my food, clothing, and education, when others were forcing their daughters to exchange for huge amounts of betrothal gifts. She had never forced me. Those were the responsibilities and obligations that a mother should have, but when it came to me, the redundant daughter, they became extra rewards and the hardships that she repeated over and over again, with a sob. She finally asked me, "Can't you understand your mother's difficulties? What should I understand about her?" 9. My father was driven by his lust and didn't take any precautions. He left a mess behind after having sex and walked away. My mother, unable to confront the culprit, shifted the blame onto me. She clearly could have gone for an abortion without hesitation, but she was afraid of dying on the abortion table. So she reluctantly gave birth to me, after giving birth to a burden. She was full of grievances and took out all her resentment on me, but did she ever think about whether I wanted to be born into this rotten family? She said she treated me well with all her heart, eating my brother's leftovers, wearing my brother's old clothes, sleeping on a bedboard until I was 18 years old, and even going to college by applying for student loans and working part-time to get by. Was this called treating me well? When I first entered the society, in order to close deals, I almost ran myself ragged every time I endured by eating steamed buns. At that time, she said that children should be independent when they grow up, and she gave my room to my nephew as a study and forced me out of the house. Was that also for my own good? She finally started to be good to me when I finally managed to earn a monthly salary of over 10,000 yuan after 2 years of hard work. She even heard that I was going to study abroad for further education and insidiously plotted against me. Shamelessly, she went to clean my rental house but stole my bank card. Then, under the pretext of saving money for me, she withdrew the 100,000 yuan that I had saved for 3 years for studying abroad in one go. She had her reasons. "You're going so far away, and your mother will miss you, unless I die. I can't bear to let my precious child leave me," she said. "Mom will take care of the money for you and give it back to you when you get married." I didn't wait until I got married to find out that there were only 20,000 yuan left of my 100,000 yuan. She used my money to buy insurance for the whole family, and my own insurance was included. It's more practical to spend the money on our own family than on outsiders. With this insurance, everyone will have protection, and they will all remember your kindness, she said. But who would have believed that if I hadn't heard it with my own ears after I died in my previous life? The insurance she bought for them were serious illness insurance and endowment insurance, while for me, it was a high-value accident insurance. Perhaps at that moment, she never expected me to live to a ripe old age. However, no one in the family remembered my kindness. All they remembered was that I had caused a huge commotion in the family over a few tens of thousands of yuan. My aggrieved mother was forced to stand on the windowsill by me threatening to jump off to put an end to the family conflict. In the end, the police were called to our house, and countless cameras were pointed at our home, but in the face of the crying and accusing of the whole family and my mother's tearful tolerance, I was labeled as an unfilial daughter and a selfish person, becoming an every rat in the street cries out. Even the company was willing to compensate me with N plus 1 month's salary to fire me. When I had nothing and was almost driven to the brink of despair, my mother blamed me again. If you were more gentle-natured and willing to sacrifice for the family, how could you have ended up like this? In the end, it's all because of your bad temper, your stubbornness, and your stinginess, she said. The one who took you in at the end was still me. Can't you just let me have some peace of mind? If I had known that her taking me in meant taking my life, I would rather have starved to death outside, compared to my thoroughly bad brother and my father who didn't hide his disgust for me at all. She was the dull knife that slowly killed me with the guise of family affection. I hated her deeply. So, when she said that my sister-in-law had diarrhea and asked if I had changed the milk powder, I immediately replied in the family group, "Mom, you really shouldn't have given the expired milk powder to my sister-in-law. Saving that little bit of money won't make you rich. Is it really necessary?" From this moment on, the chaos in the family would never stop, and the knife that should have fallen on my mother, I had taken it for her time and time again. This time, she deserved to bleed all over by herself. It wasn't enough, I also sent her a message. The news has announced that you should collect the cold-resistant food and supplies. If you let my brother's 2 treasures go hungry, you'll be in trouble. Don't think I'm being kind-hearted. I knew better than anyone that my mother, who was being cursed at by the whole family, was full of anger and wanted to take it out on me. There was no way she would listen to my advice. Sure enough, as soon as I sent the message with the location of the warehouse with the most supplies, it turned into an exclamation mark. She blocked me really quickly. It doesn't matter. This is exactly what I wanted, for her to be completely unyielding. The more firmly she refused today, the louder the slap in the face she would get tomorrow. 10. I didn't sleep well all night. In my dreams and even when I was half awake, I saw the tragic scene of how I had frozen to death. This also made me clearly realize that when a disaster strikes, what's truly terrifying is the human heart. So, early the next morning, I made an appointment with the people who installed bulletproof windows and iron doors to come to my house. At this time, the temperature had already dropped below 0, and people began to realize that something was wrong. There were obviously a lot more people stockpiling supplies than the day before. Many employees of the door and window stores had taken leave due to the sudden low temperature, and most likely, they had gone to stockpile supplies. The only ones who came were a husband and wife. They were honest and simple, and their financial situation was indeed not good. Just by adding an extra 100 yuan, they were willing to come and install the windows and doors in the howling cold wind. 2 hours later, the windows and doors were installed, and they even connected the wires. When they left, I gave them an extra 1,000 yuan and told them the location of the nearest storage warehouse. The government has been notifying people for a day. You must stockpile the necessary supplies and food in case of any emergency, I said. The couple was already stunned by the supplies piled up in my house. After hearing what I said, their initially indifferent attitude began to waver, but we still have 2 bags of salt left from the last time we stockpiled it a few years ago. Do you think this time, it's better to be prepared? You can consider it yourself, I replied. When the apocalypse comes, the first to die will be those who are overly kind-hearted. I'm alone and weak. All I can do is protect myself and not cause trouble for society. Giving them an extra 1,000 yuan is enough for them to buy a lot of rice and dry food, if they can make it to the storage warehouse in time. After seeing off the installers, my father's call came in. I didn't answer it either. He and my brother were shouting wildly in the family group, "The weather is so cold. Your sister-in-law wants to have hot pot. Bring back 3 pounds of beef for us to cook," they demanded. "Bring me a case of beer. Max wants milk tea with pearls," they added. "Your sister-in-law is so angry that she's bleeding. Bring her a pack of diapers as a way to atone for your mistakes," they ordered. After waiting for a long time with no response, my father roared again. "Your mother can't handle everything alone. Hurry up and get back here to help. You're such a useless thing. You can't even do such a small thing without me having to ask you several times." Snowflakes began to fall outside, and the whole world was in a panic as people belatedly started to stockpile supplies, only they were still living a life of indulgence. I shook my head and smiled. "Just wait," I replied. Then I silently exited the group chat. 11. Let them wait until they die and see if they can get the wine and meat they want, and I'm really curious how many days they can last with their empty refrigerator, considering they used to only eat fresh vegetables and meat that were bought and cooked on the same day. I got up and plugged in the wires to my iron door. Whoever dares to cause trouble for me, I'll electrocute them one by one. If a whole family comes, I'll just bury them all together. 12. It snowed in August. The temperature dropped from 36 degrees Celsius to minus 10 degrees Celsius in just one noon. At this time, people seemed to realize the accuracy of the government's notification and began to frantically stockpile supplies, with the supply falling short of demand. Not only did the prices skyrocket, but there were also quantity restrictions based on the number of people. The news even kept broadcasting the bloody scenes that broke out due to the rush to grab supplies. Sure enough, when people's lives are at stake, they lose all sense of shame and morality, but all this has nothing to do with me. I curled up in my little nest, drew the light-blocking curtains, and started eating freshly baked durians while holding a hot water bag. The soft, glutinous, and sweet durian made me shake my head in delight. It was my favorite treat in both my past and present lives. Just as I was happily opening a can of ice-cold cola, my family started making video calls to me again. I was too busy eating to pay attention. Then my brother's message came. 13. If you still recognize this family, quickly drive out and buy all the supplies and food we need at home. I'll reluctantly forgive you for hitting my son and poisoning my wife and baby. He threatened, otherwise, you'll bear the consequences. I bit into a piece of warm durian flesh, tears streaming down my face from the deliciousness, and replied vaguely, I gave all my money to Mom. Where do I have the money to buy things? I'm almost freezing to death. Transfer me 100 yuan to fill up the car with gas. Look, as soon as money was mentioned, my brother, who usually acted like a domineering president, became quiet. A few minutes later, my mother added me back on Instagram and asked me in a trembling voice, Nina, where did you take Mom's money? Quickly bring it back to Mom. I'm in urgent need of it. Too lazy to type. I sent back a series of question marks. My mother typed and deleted in the dialog box, and finally said, Nina, stop fooling around. Bring the money back. Now the price of food is rising sharply. Take out all your savings. And it's most important for our family to get through this difficult time together. When your brother's year-end bonus comes out, we'll pay you back. Quickly, drive your car back and make a few more trips to buy enough supplies for our family to last for 3 months. Seeing that I didn't respond, she started playing the victim again. Your sister-in-law had diarrhea after drinking the milk powder, and the whole family blames me for it. Max even poured boiling water on me. My dear daughter, come back and help Mom, she pleaded. Mom promises that from now on, I'll protect you, only you. I took a big gulp of cola. Does the pie taste good? Why do you always like to make false promises to me? It's time to draw one for my brother because he's the biggest eater and will be the first to get hungry. My mother became anxious. What time is it now? And you're still joking around. Mom has raised you so big. Do you really want to watch Mom die of anxiety and the whole family starve to death? 14. I replied that of course I wouldn't. Just as she was about to heave a sigh of relief, I quickly added, but I can close my eyes and not look. After that, their curses, accusations, and even threats to kill me, I treated them all like spam messages. Only those who are incompetent will fly into a rage. If they have the ability, let them come and kill me now. I want to see if they will die on the road first or if I will laugh myself to death in bed first. Until the snow was falling harder and harder, and the weather forecast reminded that the outside temperature had dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius, my family members who had been living in indulgence finally realized that the apocalyptic cold snap was not a joke, but they had placed all their hopes on my mother's act of playing the victim. They really hadn't stockpiled a single grain of rice. In my previous life, when I wanted to stockpile supplies and food, they were afraid of spending money and said that it was all a panic deliberately created by unscrupulous merchants to clear out the old grain in their warehouses. They not only forbade me from buying supplies, but also forced me to hand over my bank card. Your sister-in-law wants a big house with a garden, and your brother is at a crucial stage of his career advancement. You can't put too much pressure on him. Go and take out a loan, they ordered, just because I refused. They chose to take drastic measures and get the accident insurance money from me. Now, in the midst of great panic, they naturally thought of me again, but they were no longer as sharp-tongued as before. 15. My mother cried and coaxed me. My dear daughter, where are you? It's so cold. Do you have enough clothes? Have you eaten enough? We're all together as a family, but you've run off somewhere alone. Mom is so worried about you. If anything happens to you, Mom won't live anymore, she said. Taking advantage of her fake concern, I sent her a selfie of me eating a self-heating hot pot. I'm still alive. Save the morning words for later. Cry properly for your son in a few days, I replied. My mother was left speechless, but I heard my great-nephew crying loudly on the other end of the phone. I want to eat hamburgers. I want to eat French fries. I'm so hungry. I don't care. I want them, he wailed. My delicate sister-in-law was also sobbing softly. The baby's diapers are all gone. The baby also wants them. The baby doesn't want to use the dirty adult pads, she complained. Seeing that I didn't say a word, my mother tentatively asked me, "My dear daughter, can you bring back a KFC family meal for your nephew when you come home, and also bring a pack of the largest sized imported diapers for your sister-in-law? Mom got a postpartum illness when giving birth to you. Whenever the weather changes, my knees ache terribly. I really can't go out. Mom has no other choice." If I don't count on my sweet little daughter, who else can understand my difficulties? In the past, whenever she used the favor of giving birth to me to coerce me, I would always give in. Even if I grumbled, I would still do as much as I could, so much so that when she heard that I was silent on my end, she thought she had succeeded for sure and visibly relaxed. As soon as she relaxed, my father, who had been waiting and watching the situation, didn't hold back anymore. He quickly listed out the items like reporting a menu: 5 bags of rice, 10 pounds of pork, 10 pounds of beef and mutton, buy some vegetables and fruits as well, not less than 30 pounds, he ordered. These are all the daily necessities for our family. You can do me a favor and make a trip for your mother, he said. This sentence, "you can do me a favor," was probably the softest words my father had ever said in 2 lifetimes. But I just didn't want to do this favor. My brother also quickly chimed in: 5 cases of beer and beverages, 2 large packs of Sherry's imported snacks, and buy me 5 cartons of cigarettes first. I listened and tapped on the input box to record them down one by one. After everyone finished speaking, I even asked, "Is that all?" There was a pause on their end. I sent them the shopping list. "I've sorted it out for you. Buy it as soon as possible. It's hard to say if you can still grab them after 11 o'clock, I said. Then I hung up the voice call with a click. In fact, it was already minus 30 degrees Celsius now. Who on earth would still open their business in such extremely cold weather? In the South, there is no heating in winter, and even extremely cold weather below zero is very rare. Many families don't even have a warm down jacket. In the midst of chaos, people have already turned up the air conditioner to the maximum and stayed at home to enjoy hot pot and stewed meat. But I deliberately said that. They were so united when dealing with me. I want to see who will be the unlucky one pushed out of the door this time without me. 10 minutes later, my brother sent me 3 words: check the surveillance. I had spent my own money on installing that surveillance camera at that time, in order to collect evidence of my mother being abused. But when the police came to the door, my mother chose to forgive my father. My brother unplugged the surveillance camera and scolded me for trying to stir up trouble. My father angrily smashed a mop at me. When I tried to fight back, my mother hugged me around the waist and shouted at my father, who was beating me violently, "Don't blame her. The child doesn't understand things. There's no need to be so angry." I was clearly trying to save her from the abyss of abuse. Even she had promised me that once my father was judged to be an abuser, she could get a divorce smoothly, and then I could live our own small life far away. But when it came to the crucial moment, it turned out to be my scheming and unscrupulous actions. She even took sides and let me be beaten until my head was covered in blood by my father. I cried and asked her why she did this. She just kept her head down, wiping her tears meekly. "I don't want you and your brother to be gossiped about for having a father in prison. Besides, your father is actually quite good except for his tendency to hit people," she said. I was so angry that I almost had a heart attack. As a result, I didn't go home for several months and didn't care about my mother's life or death anymore. It was only when she promised to return 50,000 yuan for my down payment on my birthday this time that I went back home, but I never expected that they wanted my money, my car, and even my life. When I opened the surveillance, the scene inside was terrifying. My mother was beaten by my father until her face was covered in blood. She curled up on the ground like a dead dog, barely breathing, and was still begging for mercy. I didn't give the money to her. She stole my money. It's true. My brother stood there with his arms crossed, looking at her coldly. "If you hadn't given the family's money to Nina, how could we have run out of living expenses? You love your precious daughter so much. Now that our family has no money to stockpile supplies, where is she? Why doesn't she come to save you?" My mother wiped the blood off her face while crying. "I didn't give her the money. She will listen to me and come back. She is my best daughter. Please wait a little longer, okay? My best daughter." Only she herself knew how much sincerity there was in those words. The most terrifying thing was that my delicate sister-in-law was drinking bird's nest milk with a straw in her mouth, and Max was nestled in his mother's arms watching TV. It was as if they were separated from this scene, living in a peaceful world of their own. My mother and I had always been the 2 people in this family who were tacitly understood to be the ones who should be sacrificed. It was taken for granted that a great mother should sacrifice everything for her son. It was also considered perfectly normal for his sister to help her brother get married and start a career, but why was his mere existence so precious that all the women in the family had to sacrifice their lives for him? I couldn't stand watching this scene. I immediately shouted at the surveillance, "Save it. Instead of acting out this melodrama, it's better to stockpile supplies earlier, with the half hour you've wasted. I'm afraid you won't even be able to buy a single green onion." At this moment, the breaking news reported that in the city with a temperature of minus 35 degrees Celsius, there was no one left on the street. Even the supermarkets had all closed their doors. The reporter was staggering in the strong wind and heavy snow, struggling to stand up and urging citizens not to go out unless necessary. In this extreme weather, everything was uncertain. It's over. Acting pitiful is not as good as actually suffering. Just wait to starve to death, I said. Everyone looked at the camera in unison, and my father's face was the ugliest. The ploy of playing the victim was probably his idea. He had used my sympathy, pity, and guilt for my mother to suck my blood time and time again. He just didn't expect that I had changed. His plan of getting something for nothing had failed. So, the person finally forced to go out to find supplies was him, and I had expected this. 17. The reason was simple. My mother couldn't drive, and besides, she was old, weak, sick, and couldn't carry much. My brother was the apple of the family's eye, the pillar of the family. Even if the whole family died, he had to live. My delicate sister-in-law and the precious grandson were both the apples of my brother's eye. We shouldn't even think about or mention the idea of asking them to go out. So, the person finally forced to go out became my father. He looked at the camera reluctantly, his voice trembling. "Nina, I'm your father. I'm already old. How can you bear to let me die outside?" I twitched the corner of my mouth. "I'm your daughter. How could you bear to let me die outside? We all have a heart, if you can bear it. Why can't I? If everyone endures a little, the world will be more harmonious," I replied. He was so angry that I added, "Besides, it's your daughter-in-law who forced you to go, not me. Shouldn't you be angry with your son and daughter-in-law? If I were your daughter-in-law, I wouldn't force you like this. Even if I were to be frozen to the point of being disabled or even die, I wouldn't let you, my father, risk your life to find a way for the whole family to survive." My mother listened to these words and her body trembled. She grabbed my father and wouldn't let him go out. My father's face became darker and darker, but my brother became more and more impatient because of my delicate sister-in-law's continuous crying. "Dad, hurry up! Max is crying because he's hungry. And Sherry is so uncomfortable that her eyes are red. Do you want me to be heartbroken before you're willing to go out?" my brother said. My brother had been spoiled to the point of being used to having everything served to him on a silver platter. He only lived in his own world and never cared about his parents' feelings or their lives and deaths. In his eyes, there were only his delicate wife and baby and his heir. I really liked watching them fight among themselves. I leisurely opened a pack of spicy strips, seeing that my father had no choice. After muttering for a long time, he obediently wrapped himself up like a penguin, picked up the key to the electric bike, and was about to go out. What a pitiful family. They had fallen so low that they didn't even have a car now. They had planned well. What was mine was theirs. After they killed me, my car would belong to them, but in this life, they were destined to be disappointed. Asking a man in his 60s to ride an electric bike out in such strong wind and heavy snow, anyone with a brain could figure out whether he could come back alive or not. My mother finally couldn't bear it anymore. She rushed to the door and blocked it tightly. "You're trying to kill your father. It's snowing so heavily, and it's already minus 30 degrees Celsius. Your father is even wearing my down jacket. If he goes out, he won't be able to come back alive," she said. It turned out that my mother understood all these things. It was just that in my previous life, the one who went out was me, the one she had deliberately chosen to buy the high-value accident insurance for. So, she watched me go to my death without a second thought and watched me die right in front of her eyes, even if that person had been replaced by my father, who had beaten and kicked her. She would have felt reluctant and couldn't bear to let him go, but was this biological daughter really so unworthy of her love? The tears caused by the spicy strips blurred my face. I wiped them fiercely and continued to watch the camera. In the camera, Sherry started crying immediately. "The sister-in-law grandma is bad. The baby wants diapers. The baby wants diapers," she cried. As soon as Max saw that his mother was unhappy, he started rolling on the ground. "I want fried chicken, French fries, and hamburgers. I want to eat them, Grandpa. I want to eat them," he shouted. Seeing that my father was hesitating, Max crawled over and hugged my father's leg, acting coquettishly. "My dear Grandpa, your chubby grandson wants to eat fried chicken and French fries. Will you buy them for your grandson?" My father nodded weakly. He touched and looked at his precious grandson's face again and again. Finally, He shook off my mother's hand and walked out the door without looking back amidst her cries and wails. My mother fell to the ground and cried bitterly. My brother's family of 3 thought she was annoying and directly went back to the small room, locked the door, and let her do whatever she wanted. Having no way to deal with my brother and the others, she targeted me again. 18. Nina, you're a devil. You incited your brother to force your father to go out and buy things. You're forcing him to die. You won't die a good death. You'll die on the roadside, and no one will collect your body, she cursed. The curse came true in my previous life, but it was useless in this life. After she finished cursing through gritted teeth, I stroked my virtual cat and smiled. It was your daughter-in-law who wanted the baby diapers. Why are you blaming me again? Besides, didn't you always say that you could enjoy a good life once your husband was gone, now that he's going to die? Isn't your good life about to begin? My mother's face froze. She never expected that the words she had used to encourage me when using me as a weapon would now come back to haunt her. I didn't mean that, she stammered. I shushed her. Yes, you did. After all, I told you to stockpile supplies a long time ago, but you just refused to go. You were just waiting for your husband to go and die now. I casually sent my brother a screenshot of the message where I had reminded my mother to stockpile supplies. Bang! My brother's bedroom door was thrown open, and a resounding slap landed on my mother's face. So Nina already told you to stockpile supplies, but you had to wait until now to send my father out, and then you put on this act of being heartbroken, trying to shift all the blame onto me, he roared. You're having a great time now, with no one to discipline you. You can sit back and enjoy yourself, but you're making me carry a guilty conscience for the rest of my life and unable to sleep peacefully. You're such a vicious mother. There are few like you in the world. Sherry's milk powder wasn't poisoned by Nina at all. You bought the expired one for her out of cheapness. You were deliberately trying to harm my baby. Get out of this house. Don't come back until my father returns. My brother pushed and shoved, trying to drive my mother out the door, while Sherry stood by, sobbing softly. Max kicked and punched my mother, venting his anger. At this moment, my mother was truly afraid and finally stopped being so submissive. She knelt on the ground, talking nonstop, kowtowing to admit her mistakes, and even slapping herself in the face to gain sympathy. My brother finally, under Sherry's subtle hint, let my mother go. Was Sherry being kind-hearted? No. It was because they needed a free nanny to take care of the housework inside and out, and my mother was the most suitable candidate. There were indeed good days waiting for her. 19. The snow kept falling, and there was no more sound from the house. I fell into a deep sleep in the warm embrace of the electric heater, until the next day when it was dawn. My father still hadn't returned. In fact, by this time, everyone already had a pretty clear idea of my father's fate, but they still held out hope. Looking at the dwindling ingredients in the refrigerator, my mother timidly suggested, let's eat less. Once your father comes back, things will be better for all of us. My brother nodded in agreement, but as soon as he turned around, he divided my mother's share of the food equally between Sherry and Max. You should save some, you're old, and you've eaten more salt than we've eaten rice. You don't need this extra bite, he said. Your grandson is still young and in a stage of rapid growth. He needs to get enough nutrition. My mother stood stiffly at the kitchen door. The freezing temperature in the kitchen made her nose red, and she sniffled. Although she was also very hungry, she didn't dare to ask for food. She tried her best to make herself as invisible as possible, like a sinner. The way she always failed to find her place and was pushed to the edge, looking so helpless, was truly pitiful. Even so, it couldn't stop the refrigerator from gradually emptying. By the evening, they couldn't even gather enough ingredients for a pot of soup. Sherry, who used to only eat fresh vegetables and wouldn't allow any vegetables or fruits to be kept overnight, now didn't care so much. She pointed at my mother and blamed her for not buying enough groceries for a few days in advance, making everyone starve with her. The sister-in-law grandma is trying to starve the baby to death. The baby is crying, she said in a whiny voice. Max sided with his mother and immediately kicked and beat my mother, blaming her for trying to starve everyone. My mother, in her 60s, was beaten until her face turned pale and she was on the verge of collapse, but she gritted her teeth and didn't dare to resist or dodge. It was only when she saw the surveillance camera that her eyes lit up. Oh, so my mother was the first to realize that I was a living grain depot, but with a distance of 30 miles and ice and snow all the way. Would my brother be able to come and find me? 20. Apparently, he could, but he could never have imagined what this choice would mean for him. The ferocity of a desperate person is terrifying. My brother actually stole a neighbor's SUV. With his skills from working in a car repair shop, he managed to start the car and drive it on the road. After a long and arduous journey, he reached my rental house and knocked on the door furiously. Nina, open the door, I know you're inside. He shouted, I don't want anything else, I just want a few days' worth of food and supplies for our family. I'm your brother, you can't bear to watch me starve to death. can you? If you don't open the door, I'll make all your neighbors come and see what kind of heartless person you are, leaving your family to fend for themselves while you hide here and enjoy a comfortable life alone, after making a commotion for a long time and getting no response." He stood in the corridor and shouted loudly, lying that his sister had died in the rental house and he had come to collect her body. Since the information matched and many people in the whole community hadn't seen me for several days, they naturally believed his words. With a pair of pliers that someone had thrown out, he managed to pry open the door, but the room was empty, there was no one, and there were no supplies. My brother was stunned and panicked, but I just smiled. Who would be so stupid as to sit at home and wait for him to come and kill them? Don't you know the saying, a crafty rabbit has 3 dens? I had already moved out of that rental house the day I broke up with my mother and moved into my current rental house. I had been waiting for them to come and find nothing. My brother's last hope was instantly extinguished. He called me tremblingly. I was sitting by the steaming hot pot, laughing softly. Mom was right. "You really are a giant baby who will cling to me," I said. He was taken aback for a moment, then his tone softened and he began to beg me, "Nina, don't listen to Mom's instigation. I'm your brother. We're blood relatives, connected by blood even if our bones are broken. At this time, if we don't help each other, who else can save us?" He tightened his grip on the wrench in his hand, and I could clearly see the fierce look in his eyes. "So," I laughed without hiding my feelings, "you want to kill me and take my supplies, don't you, my dear brother?" I said coldly. He was stunned. I continued, "But you're thinking too much. Mom didn't expect you to come back alive when she sent you out. Once you all die, I'll go and pick up Mom and claim the insurance money with her, and then we can enjoy a good life together." That was the end of my stratagem of alienation. After hanging up the phone, I curled my lips and got into the bathtub for a bubble bath. I turned on the home surveillance. My brother finally returned home 2 hours later, with one hand severely frostbitten, but when he saw the tragic scene at home, he slumped to the ground. 21. Max was huddled on the sofa, trembling in fear like he had been scared out of his wits. It turned out that after my brother was forced to go out by Sherry's crying and shouting, she had once again incited Max to beat my mother, venting their anger and dissatisfaction at being hungry and cold. My mother hated Sherry's excessive and troublesome behavior, but she endured it again and again for the sake of her son, until I smiled and said in the surveillance, "Did you send your brother to find me? The person who froze to death downstairs really looks like him. Goodness, the wife beater is dead." My mother immediately went crazy. She threw herself in front of the surveillance camera, her eyes wide with anger, and shouted at me. But I didn't respond to a single word. Sherry hugged Max. Her face pale, she stopped pretending to be a delicate woman and directly lashed out at my mother. "It's all your fault. You killed my husband. I'm going to kill you. Why didn't you die instead? You useless old woman. It was your idea that made me lose my husband and my son lose his father. I'm going to kill you." My mother was on the verge of a breakdown after enduring it for so long. She finally couldn't take it anymore when Sherry slapped her hard enough to make her nose bleed. And all the pent-up frustration of the past few days came out. I wasn't standing in front of her this time. All the scolding, slaps, and obstruct she had endured in the past few days were all borne by herself. In my previous life, she had told me to just endure it. Now that it was her turn, it turned out that she couldn't endure it either. She had had enough of being oppressed, exploited, and treated like nothing. Her only spiritual support had been my father and my brother, with her spirit broken. She had gone crazy. My mother wiped the blood off her face and showed a cruel smile towards my brother. My brother finally collapsed to the ground. As my mother approached him step by step, he kept backing away, but then he remembered my mother's constant criticism of Sherry, her harsh treatment of Max in the past few days, and even her blaming him for my father's death. He felt a surge of hatred. He also remembered what I had told him, that Mom had never expected him to come back alive. It turned out that Mom not only didn't expect him to come back alive, but also had no intention of letting his wife survive. He went crazy and roared at my mother. "Why did you do this? I'm your son, the son you love the most. How could you, for the sake of Nina and the insurance money, want the lives of our whole family? You're a devil." My mother wiped her hands on her apron. There was a dazed look in her eyes, along with a chilling smile. "I've lived my whole life for you. They say that if you want your son to have a good life, you need a large dowry from your daughter, so I gave birth to a sister for you despite all the pressure," she said. "Look, over the years, she has contributed a lot to our food, drink, and daily expenses. When she gets married, Mom will ask for a huge dowry, then the tuition fees for my dear grandson's whole life will be covered. How can you say I don't love you or that I'm not your mother? Oh, it was your wife who instigated this." She's a troublemaker, always playing both sides and causing trouble. Your sister should have beaten her to death. She killed your father, and she was going to hang me on the balcony to force people to send food. I had no choice but to strike first. My brother couldn't listen anymore. Overwhelmed with anger, he picked up a vase next to him and smashed it on my mother's head, again and again, until my mother's eyes widened in horror and she completely lost consciousness. He finally hugged the completely stunned Max and curled up on the ground, shivering as he looked at the heavy snow outside the door. My mother shed 2 lines of tears unwillingly. Perhaps she would never understand why her son, whom she had painstakingly loved and cared for all her life, would kill her after she had done everything for him. She certainly couldn't imagine that she had protected him from the wind and rain all his life. No, when he had to face the harsh reality on his own. He was completely helpless, and in his panic and confusion, he naturally transferred all his anger to those who couldn't hold an umbrella for him. I reluctantly called the police with a sobbing voice after it got dark, but at this time, in the ice and snow, the temperature had dropped to minus 70 degrees Celsius. The snow on the road was already higher than a person. Although the nearest police station had tried their best to dispatch officers, it still took a whole night for them to reach my mother's house. That night, the snow piled up so much that it broke the power lines, and the whole world was plunged into darkness. Only I, after turning on the generator, was eating extremely spicy loasafen. I was so spicy enough to cry, and then I felt so nauseous that I vomited. After going through all that discomfort, I finally curled up in bed, hugging my cat and crying loudly. I've taken my revenge, and I've been reborn. Everything is different now. Everything has changed, I sobbed. 22. As for what that night of darkness meant for Max and his father, we can only guess. The bathroom and bedroom filled with blood, the kitchen wafting with the smell of meat, and my mother lying dead in the living room, staring at them with an expression of unwillingness. Were they filled with fear, unease, and trepidation? All these things became a thing of the past as the police sirens rang out. I took out the home surveillance footage and provided evidence to add fuel to my brother's imprisonment. As I had expected, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In the freezing cold, no one went to see if he was doing well. It was Max who the police repeatedly asked me if I wanted to take him in and raise him. I refused firmly. I can't afford to take on the responsibility for another life when I don't even have the ability to take good care of myself, I said. In the end, Max, who had been traumatized and developed a psychological shadow, was sent to his grandfather's house. It was said that his grandfather's newly married wife was a shrew who would often beat and scold him and tell him to get lost. He had a miserable life and was sent to a mental hospital a few years later. Occasionally, when he was lucid, he would call me crying and begging me to save him. I felt a sense of pity. I kissed the cat in my arms and said, "Who are you?" A few days later, an ice sculpture was found in the river, along with a red down jacket and a familiar electric bike, as they had wished in my previous life. I froze to death outside the door in the temperature of minus 40 degrees Celsius. After selling the house where the murder had taken place and dividing the money with Max, we each got 2 million yuan in property. But when Max escaped from the mental hospital, he fell off the wall and died on the spot. All that money became mine alone. 3 months later, the ice and snow melted, and the city gradually regained its vitality after surviving the disaster. Those unbearable past events were permanently buried in the past, and I finally stepped out of the shadow that had imprisoned me for 2 lifetimes. With several million yuan in my hands, I walked towards a new beginning. Facing the sunshine and embracing a new life. Story 2. 30 days into the zombie outbreak, there were no signs of other survivors in the city. Suddenly, a note came from upstairs. "Hello, I have been watching you for a long time. January 3rd, 2030, Sunday." I groggily opened my eyes and lit up my phone screen to check the time. On this day off, as usual, I stayed in bed, with Nico snoring cozily in my arms. I aimlessly browsed through short video apps while a message notification from Emerson popped up on Instagram. Emerson, my boyfriend of 5 years, currently works at a research institute in the city, focusing on virus research. I might not make it home tonight. Yesterday, a mutated squirrel was found in City C, and the institute is busy collecting blood samples for study. The current indicators suggest it might be a new virus. Startled, I jumped out of bed, scaring Nico, who immediately leapt off and stared at me with wide eyes. Mutations, a new virus. Lately, I've been reading too many apocalyptic novels online, leading me to ponder what essentials I'd need to comfortably survive such an end-of-the-world scenario. I got out of bed, freshened up, and decided to head to the mall to stock up on survival supplies. While Emerson hadn't mentioned anything about an impending apocalypse, I felt it was better to be safe than sorry. Especially since a virus outbreak 10 years ago had forced everyone to stay indoors. I drove to the city's largest mall and cleared out the shelves of our favorite snacks, Nico's beloved canned cat treats, and freeze-dried food. pleased with the 2 shopping carts full of snacks in my car. I prepared to drive home. Wait, had I forgotten something important? I closed the car door, turned around, and went back to the mall, grabbing 2 more shopping carts to start filling them with self-heating rice meals, instant noodles, various canned meats, compressed biscuits, rice, oil, seasonings, cat litter, cat food, tissues, sanitary pads, disinfectant, and more. Eventually, I realized 2 carts weren't enough, and with a grand gesture, I asked the staff to deliver everything to my home. The staff, although smiling, seemed puzzled and asked why I was buying so much. "I'm stocking up for a small store," I quipped. I could feel the staff's smile stiffen, but they flattered me with, "You really have a good head for business." They probably thought I was nuts, but I didn't care. By the time the staff helped me arrange everything in the 2 spare bedrooms at home, it was already past 5 in the afternoon. Luckily, when we were house hunting, I insisted on buying a large place. Emerson, unable to persuade me otherwise, tearfully agreed to purchase our current home, a spacious apartment on the 23rd floor with 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 bathrooms. Standing in the living room, I surveyed the area, considering what other essential items we might need. Just then, Nico jumped onto the water dispenser and meowed at me. The water jug was down to 1/3 full. "Nico, you really are mommy's big boy." I immediately called the water delivery guy and asked him to bring all the water he had in stock. The delivery guy, who was about to close for the day, agreed to deliver immediately, filling our 3rd room with 120 jugs of water. Later that evening, around 8 p.m., Emerson messaged me again. "Did you buy more bags and shoes? Why have both my cards been charged so much?" I rolled my eyes. "Am I not frugal?" I didn't reply. He messaged again. "Don't go out for a while. Things don't seem very calm. B City has also reported infected animals, chickens and ducks." My mind raced. Chickens and ducks, aren't those what people eat? Could it infect humans? Not sure yet, but it's very possible. What happens if it infects someone? It took about 10 minutes before he replied. "If it's mild, it might just be like the flu. If severe, zombies." Zombies, I froze. If it's really zombies, then isn't it truly the end of the world? Although it wasn't certain yet, to be absolutely safe, I immediately booked an appointment online for a technician to come the next day to install multiple security nets, replace all the glass in our home with bulletproof tempered glass, and add an extra fireproof security door. I also ordered a bunch of fever and cold medicine through a food delivery app. I also ordered many household items on the shopping app, just in case something broke one day and it would be too late. Additionally, I ordered many climbing ropes and other survival tools. Then I got another message from Emerson on Instagram. "What did you buy this time?" I was speechless. Buying life, too. As expected, Emerson didn't return last night and didn't reply to my Instagram messages either. When I opened my phone, it had only 18% battery left. I had fallen asleep watching outdoor survival videos last night. Damn, I had forgotten to charge it. Wait, electricity. How could I forget about such an important thing? I quickly ordered a bunch of power banks on the shopping app, specifically requesting that only fully charged ones be shipped, and if any were uncharged, they should be charged as quickly as possible. I need them fast. I also went out and bought many solar-powered chargers. When I finally felt prepared and lay down on the sofa, I suddenly smelled something foul. It was a familiar stench. I turned my head and, sure enough, Nico had pooped again. Resigned, I cleaned up after him, pondering what to do with my toilet if the water supply stopped. In the end, under Nico's dumbfounded gaze, I mimicked the scene of squatting in his litter box. Well, that seemed tolerable, I guess, so I ordered even more cat litter for delivery. The installation technician and the courier happened to arrive at the same time. I supervised them, insisting they add several more layers. As the technician worked, he asked me puzzledly, "Boss, why do you want so many layers of wire mesh on such a beautiful balcony? It really spoils the view. I've been in this business for years, and this is the first time I've done something like this." I stroked Nico in my arms and replied, "To prevent the cat from falling off." Nico was usually not allowed on the balcony. Previously, out of fear that he might fall, I kept the balcony door firmly shut, never allowing him a step outside. This made him intensely curious about everything on the balcony. Suddenly, he leaped from my arms to the edge of the balcony's pool, meowing at the lone goldfish and even attempting to paw at it. I rushed over, scooped Nico up, and threw him back into the living room, then shut the balcony door. But then, a sudden inspiration struck. I looked around the balcony, which had only a small pool and a set of table and chairs. I opened my delivery app and ordered soil, fertilizer, seeds, and other materials. Since I didn't know how to garden, I chose some easy-to-grow plants. If an apocalypse came, keeping fish would be impractical as changing the water would consume too much of the precious resource, so Filling the small empty pool with soil for planting vegetables, and adding more planters for more crops seemed like a good idea. After discussing it with the technician, he made a call and brought over his renovation partner. They spent the afternoon building planters along the edge of the balcony. By the time everything was done, it was already past 6 in the evening. I took Nico to the pet store for a bath and deworming, then had a vegetarian meal. I had intended to indulge in a feast since it might be a while before I could enjoy such luxury again, but remembering what Emerson said last night about chickens and ducks being infected, I got scared. Life is precious, so I had to treat the vegetarian meal as if it were a delicacy. A few days later, I realized that this fear of death had saved my life. After returning home, I locked the fire escape door from the inside and installed the anti-theft lock I had purchased. Since each floor in my building is accessible by a separate card, only Emerson and I have the cards for our floor. Therefore, the only other access would be through the fire escape stairs. After entering my home and burping contentedly, I received an Instagram message from Emerson. This was his first message of the day, indicating he had been really busy. Today, there was a report of an infection in City C. The blood samples taken for analysis are quite different from any known viruses. Currently, there are no countermeasures in place. What are the symptoms? Dizziness, nausea, high fever, shock. This morning he felt unwell and went to the hospital. They thought it was just a severe fever, but by afternoon his organs began to fail, and they couldn't diagnose the problem, so they reported it to the authorities. All his organs are failing, and he might not last another 2 days. When are you coming back? Not today, maybe tomorrow. I'll spend tonight looking into this virus to see if there's any research on countermeasures. Remember to rest. After turning off my phone screen, I fell into deep thought. In just a couple of days, it means if the mutation turns people into zombies, then I have less than 2 days to prepare. 3. By the time I woke up, it was already the 3rd day, and a message popped up from my work group. Did everyone catch the news? We're temporarily halting work. No need to come in. Everyone should stay at home and stay safe. I had been so busy gathering supplies these past 2 days that I had forgotten about work, although I was fortunate that yesterday was my scheduled day off. I work as a nurse at a community clinic. It's not too busy, so I have quite a few days off. I opened the news app, and the first headline was exactly the one mentioned in my work group. A new infectious disease has emerged in City C. Residents are advised not to go out unless necessary and to take protective measures if they do. Wear masks, wash hands frequently, and avoid infection. City C is just one city away from my city A, with only City B in between. City C first discovered the mutated squirrels and then infected humans the following day. Based on this timeline, City B will likely see infected humans by tomorrow. As there are no reported cases in City A yet, it might be relatively safe for now. As I pondered, my Instagram rang. It was Emerson. How come there are extra doors in the house? I can't get in. I got out of bed to open the door for him. He looked exhausted and reeked of disinfectant. As he stooped to change his shoes, he said, "Things don't look too optimistic. I'm not high-ranking enough. A colleague from the capital took over. Now, the higher-ups want us to stay home. I think we need to prepare some." He looked around the house after changing his shoes and then stopped short. Supplies. I proudly responded, "I'm quite the thrifty housekeeper, aren't I?" His expression shifted from surprise to a bemused grin. "This is more than thrifty. You're preparing like you're first in line to avoid death." I smirked. What good is saving money if, when things get really bad, money becomes worthless? He surveyed the house and said somewhat helplessly, "Georgia, you even spent the money I was saving for your dowry." I crossed my arms, unfazed. What's the big deal with dowry? My parents are gone. No one is forcing you to pay one. If we survive, consider these supplies as your dowry to me. After a pause, he sighed deeply and, holding Nico, sat on the sofa. The department thought it was just a flu-like virus, but the person with organ failure who was brought in yesterday morning was already dead by all appearances. His brain nerves completely destroyed by an invisible black virus. Until just before I got back, he came back to life. He nodded, his voice trembling with fear. His skin turned from pale white to black and purple in just 10 minutes, and he even started moving around on the bed. Did he turn into a zombie? My voice also shook. Although I had considered the worst-case scenario of people turning into zombies, I hadn't expected it to happen so soon, or so quickly. Emerson's voice cracked as if reliving the horror. When he sprung up from the bed, we were all stunned. We intended to perform an autopsy on his body, but he was incredibly strong, grabbed one of the colleagues in the autopsy room, and bit him. That colleague was Garrett, Chin Garrett, Emerson's best friend at the department, 27 years old, had just married last year. I had attended his wedding with Emerson, who was one of his groomsmen. His bride's bouquet was caught by me. Another colleague tried to escape, but the director, who was with me in the next room observing, realized something was wrong and locked the autopsy room from the outside. I watched as 2 colleagues were killed inside. Everything happened too fast. I couldn't react. His shoulders began to tremble involuntarily, and I knew he was crying. Putting an arm around him for comfort, he looked up at me with tear-stained eyes. You know, Georgia, it's nothing like in the movies or books. People infected with the virus show symptoms within 48 hours. But if bitten by one already turned into a zombie, it only takes 10 minutes to become one of them. The leader just sent me back, demanding that we keep this confidential. All of us who are privy to this information have signed non-disclosure agreements, but can we really keep it a secret? Is he really the only person infected with the virus in the world? I didn't know how to comfort him. It felt as though something was stuck in my throat, making it dry. Looking up at the sky outside the window, the once clear sky had unknowingly turned gray, with dark clouds making it look increasingly oppressive. A storm seemed imminent. Is this peace really about to disappear? On the 4th morning, I was woken up by the noise Emerson was making. Yesterday afternoon, after Emerson and I managed our emotions, we went out and bought many books, fitness equipment, movie discs, and other entertainment supplies to keep us occupied while confined at home. After eating, he sat by the balcony window, smoking in a daze. He rarely smoked. The first time I saw him smoke was when his parents died in a car accident 2 years into our relationship. It seems, in this world, Emerson and I truly depend solely on each other. He probably hadn't slept all night. I wouldn't know. I couldn't stay awake and fell asleep on the sofa while keeping him company, only to wake up later in the big bed in my room, stepping out of the bedroom. I saw Emerson installing soundproof panels on the walls. You're awake. I bought some fried dough sticks and soy milk for breakfast downstairs. They might be a bit cold now. You might want to warm them up before eating, said Emerson, glancing at me briefly before continuing to fix the soundproof panels to the wall. Why are you installing soundproof panels? I was puzzled, considering we lived on the 23rd floor and any noise would surely not be heard from below, so. When we were buying supplies, I hadn't thought about the need for soundproof panels in our home. After installing the last soundproof panel in the living room, Emerson looked around, went to warm up the breakfast, and replied, I carefully checked the items you bought last night. There are many power banks, but they aren't very practical. If the city stops supplying electricity and water, these uncharged power banks will be useless, so I went out and bought a solar generator and a solar water pump. Though we are on a high floor, any noise becomes quite noticeable once the city is deserted. Besides, you said money won't be of any value then, so might as well be safer. I took a bite of the hot fried dough stick and gave Emerson a thumbs up. Did you notice anything unusual when you went out today? Not for now. I took a round through the city, and the supermarkets were pretty much cleared out by people. There were still quite a few people today, all out to stock up. Pharmacies were cleaned out too. Basically, anything you can think of, people have already thought of. He pulled up a chair across from me, took a sip of soy milk, and continued, It's good that we have a frontline worker at home, otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to stock up on supplies like this, he sighed. Today, Grayson from the office told me that there are also infected individuals in City B, just as I calculated. Not a bit off. Fortunately, City A hasn't found any yet. We might still have a couple of safe days. My words didn't get Emerson's agreement, which puzzled me. I looked up to see him frowning. Actually, we might not have 2 days left, he said, looking at me, although the infected in City B have been contained. Checking his itinerary revealed that he had just returned to City B from a temporary job in City A 2 days ago. We still don't know how the infection spreads. So City A isn't safe either. Suddenly, the fried dough stick in my mouth didn't taste as good. If it's airborne, do you need to quarantine yourself after going out today? Emerson gave me a look. If it was airborne, City C, where the first infected was found, would have fallen by now. So I don't think that's the case. It's very likely that it's transmitted through consumption, I suggested. Why do you say that? Because of the mutations in chickens and ducks, Emerson inquired. It's just a guess. The earliest instances of this virus were found in animals that had mutated first, and then it spread to humans. And how did the animals contract the virus? Both Emerson and I fell into deep thought for a moment, pondering over what specific vector could have facilitated the spread of this virus. What could it be? Our contemplation was interrupted by Nico's meowing at the glass door of the balcony. I walked over and through the glass. I saw the sole goldfish in the pond had turned belly up. Just yesterday, this goldfish was lively and dodging Nico's paws trying to catch it, darting around so agilely. How could it suddenly die? Emerson stared at the continuously running water pump in the pond without a word, then turned and went back inside to fetch something, reminding me not to touch the water in the pond. I shooed Nico back inside. Just as Emerson reappeared with a test strip in hand, he dipped the strip into the water, and it gradually turned from white to black. Although the water in the pond remained clear, Emerson and I exchanged glances and simultaneously exclaimed, "The water!" I drained the water from the pond into the toilet of our home, including the dead goldfish. Sorry, little goldfish. While I was doing this, Emerson was on the phone with the department head, reporting our latest discovery. We had already decided to not leave the house anymore. We had prepared everything needed at home, and the supplies I had stocked up were enough for the two of us to stay put for 3 to 4 years, perhaps even 5 or 6 years. With the vegetables we were growing on the balcony, we hoped to survive long enough for a cure to be found, or at the very least, outlast any zombies. In the evening, an emergency news broadcast interrupted the TV programming. Please avoid using tap water, as several water reservoirs in the country have been severely contaminated. Use bottled water for drinking. Do not go outside during the outbreak, avoid contact with others, and stay isolated at home. Immediately report any symptoms such as dizziness, vomiting, fever, or shock. This news was repeated for 5 minutes on TV and echoed through the loudspeakers in our neighborhood. The homeowners group chat exploded with messages bombarding both Emerson's and my phone. What does this mean? If we can't use tap water, what water should we use? Can we boil it? Isn't it said that high temperatures kill viruses? How are we supposed to bathe? Water is essential for life. If we can't use it, how are we supposed to survive? Did they mention when this will be resolved? Today I went to the store, and they refused to sell water, saying they needed to keep it for their own family. I had to run around several stores and pay a high price to get just 2 buckets of water. Now they're saying the water is unusable. Are they just waiting for us to die? I talked to a water delivery guy today, and he told me someone in our complex bought up all the water in his store a few days ago. Who is it? Which one? I'm willing to pay a high price. Me too. Emerson and I silently set our messages to do not disturb, and sat on the couch in silence for a long time. Am I being selfish? I finally voiced out after a while. Emerson sighed. When it comes to survival, there's no such thing as being selfish or not. With so many residents in our complex, 1 bucket per person wouldn't be enough, and even that wouldn't last long. But it's still not right, is it? I felt like crying, but no tears came, even though I knew it was selfish. I couldn't bring myself to tell others about the abundance of water we had, nor would I share even a single bucket. I was trained in medical nursing, taught that saving a life is more meritorious than building a 7-tier pagoda. But if I couldn't even save others, what would happen to Emerson and me? Emerson put his arm around me, letting me sob in his embrace. Around 2 in the morning, I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window in the bedroom, browsing through Facebook topics about the pandemic. Emerson, exhausted to the limit, was sound asleep on the bed, online. People were panicking about both the pandemic and water pollution, with some even suggesting the possibility of zombies and the end of the world. However, most people didn't believe such things. Suddenly, a woman's scream pierced the midnight calm outside the window. I rushed to the balcony to see what was happening. I saw a woman on the balcony of the building next door, screaming in terror, her eyes wide with horror as if she had seen something extremely frightening. Lights in several buildings turned on, and some residents, like me, stepped out onto their balconies to see what was going on. Then, a dark purple male zombie slowly emerged from the woman's apartment, moving so slowly it was more like shuffling. The woman, bracing herself against the balcony railing, cried out loudly for help. I heard a neighbor, unclear about the situation, shouting, "Bro, let's talk this out. Don't abuse your wife in the middle of the night. People are trying to sleep." I was too scared to make a sound, even though I had heard about it from Emerson and described it myself. Seeing it firsthand was terrifying. My legs went weak as I watched the zombie pounce on the woman, its long fangs biting into her neck, blood spraying out. The zombie and the woman, tangled together, struggled violently before both fell from the 23rd floor. A resident cursed into the night air, then shouted loudly, "Call the police! Call the police! Someone's been killed!" I collapsed weakly against the railing, looking down to see 2 small, overlapping figures. The zombie on top briefly lost its ability to move but soon began to slowly get up again. From the 23rd floor, they didn't die. Someone with a flashlight ran downstairs, but stopped short of approaching, probably a security guard. I faintly heard him shouting from below, "Run, run!" More and more lights came on in the complex, and the lower floors were clearly in chaos, filled with noise and intermittent screams. Suddenly, someone tapped me on the shoulder, and I nearly collapsed in shock. It was Emerson, catching me. "What's wrong?" I looked at him, my nerves finally releasing, and I began to cry in his arms, pointing to the blood-splattered balcony next door. "Zombies! The zombies are here!" Emerson comforted me continuously, helping me to the living room sofa and giving me a glass of water. He started making a phone call. "Hello, Chief. this is Emerson. An infected person has appeared in my community, and the situation is severe. Isn't there a plan from above yet? With this happening in the community, the virus will spread uncontrollably. I didn't know what was said on the other end, but I saw Emerson curse damn it as he hung up the phone abruptly. The noise outside grew louder, and I turned to look out the window. The entire community was now brightly lit. Then, the community's broadcast system activated. Emergency situation. Emergency situation. All residents, please do not leave your homes. All residents, please do not leave your homes. I repeat, do not step outside your homes. Occasional faint screams came from outside as Emerson took out a telescope and stood at the balcony, looking down. About 15 minutes later, Emerson put down the telescope, closed the balcony door, came inside, and lit a cigarette. Things are escalating faster than I expected. Is it bad downstairs? He took a drag of his cigarette and after exhaling nodded. It's a mess. The security guard who went to check was bitten. There were 4 of them. One of the women must be the one you mentioned who fell. She's turned into a zombie now. Fortunately, no residents dared to go outside. I turned on my phone and found that all the groups on Instagram had exploded with activity. Friends circles, Facebook, all the major social media platforms were abuzz. I checked the trending topics on Facebook, and they all read the same. Zombies spotted in a residential area in City C. Wandering zombies seen on the streets of City B. Zombies found in a luxury residence in City A. I handed my phone to Emerson and said, "It's happening everywhere at the same time." Emerson glanced at it just as his Instagram started ringing. It was Grayson from the Research Institute. Grayson was slightly senior to Emerson, so while Emerson was sent home, Grayson stayed at the Institute to continue working on the virus. Though he wasn't part of the top-secret team, he was Emerson's second close friend after Chin Garrett. After hanging up, Emerson slumped into the sofa, his face ashen. My emotions had mostly settled by then, and I asked him what was wrong, but he remained silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with obscurity. "The Institute, it's fallen. Grayson managed to escape. He's driven back home and is safe for now. Didn't your boss mention this when you called him?" "No, he just told me to take care of myself, not to return to the Institute, to watch my mouth," and then he hung up, but I could hear a lot of noise on his end, and someone saying to hurry up and get on the plane. "He ran away." Emerson closed his eyes and nodded. "I think so. He probably evacuated with the confidential team." I stared blankly out the window. The night had quieted down once again, and the digital clock on the TV stand loyally displayed the current time. 4:21 a.m. Emerson and I sat in the living room in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, until past 5 o'clock when we heard what sounded like siren noises from downstairs. Emerson heard it too, and we went to the balcony with a telescope to see what was happening. It was indeed the police. 2 squads of them, one of which was a SWAT team. The number of zombies downstairs hadn't increased. It was still those 2 security guards and the couple, originally just wandering aimlessly around the complex. They all turned their heads toward the sound of the police. Their heads turned, but their bodies did not. The police began firing, but the 4 zombies merely shook from the bullet's impact, their feet never stopping as they continued running straight toward the police. The male zombie, who was the strongest among the 4, charged at the forefront. Just as he was about to pounce on the leading officer, a SWAT member shot him in the head. The bullet pierced his temple, and dark blue blood spurted from the other side of his skull, and he immediately fell to the ground. Having found the effective method, the remaining 3 zombies were quickly taken down with headshots by the SWAT team. All 4 zombies lay motionless on the ground, and the police waited an additional 10 minutes to ensure there were no signs of revival before they moved the bodies onto a vehicle to be taken away. As I put down the telescope, I noticed that all the residents were standing on their balconies watching the scene, yet no one made a sound. Back inside, I asked Emerson, "All 4 zombies were killed. That should be manageable, right? Plus, now we know that shooting them in the head is most effective. The organs fail and the central nervous system is invaded and destroyed by this strange black virus, yet, this black virus can't be found in the failing organs. No, I think the central nervous system isn't just being destroyed by the virus, but controlled. That's why headshots are the most effective method." Emerson pondered for a moment. "Even so, given that this is a nationwide outbreak happening simultaneously, it's likely uncontrollable. If our complex experienced this, other areas could too. There simply aren't enough resources to handle it, and being bitten by a zombie only takes 10 minutes to turn. Even using sheer numbers, the zombies could overwhelm us." I sighed and turned off the Do Not Disturb mode on the owners group chat on my phone, only to find, unsurprisingly, that it had exploded with messages again. "What are those things? I've seen them in movies. Those are zombies. Is it really the end of the world? This must be the end times." In the community work group, the director is tagging us nurses and doctors. The city hospital is short-staffed and is asking for reinforcements from community hospitals. Who is willing to go? The pay is triple the usual rate. No one responded. This is a noble mission concerning our entire city, our nation, and the general public. The doctors and nurses at the city hospital are still fighting on the front lines. We cannot be cowards if we, as professionals, don't step up to help the people. Then no one will be able to. Gradually, a few doctors and nurses signed up, but not many. Out of a group of over 30 people, less than 10 registered. Of course, I wasn't one of them. Emerson was right. I am indeed someone who fears death. 9. It turns out, Emerson was right. By noon, the top trending topic on the internet was about zombies. Not just in our country but even other nations were falling. Talks of an apocalyptic world on the internet made everyone feel desperate. Even though it was known that zombies' weak point was their heads, the rate of eliminating zombies was far slower than their rate of spread. In just one morning, groups of zombies had gathered outside our community, and occasionally, faint cries could be heard from downstairs. Since the police left, the management office had tightly closed the main gate of the community. Fortunately, no more infections occurred inside, but outside were the family members of the residents. Because the management office had locked the gate and cut off the power to the entrance system, they couldn't get in, and their fate was to be bitten to death by zombies right outside the gates, eventually turning into zombies themselves. There was a lot of cursing in the homeowners group chat, including a new mother who had just given birth to her second child during her confinement period. She furiously accused the property management of being inhumane because her husband was bitten to pieces outside the gate and turned into a zombie. I was somewhat moved and turned to look at Emerson, who was intently fiddling with a microscope. "Are you observing the virus?" He grunted in affirmation. Emerson, an avid research enthusiast, not satisfied with just working in a research institute, also had some equipment at home. He rarely came home due to his busy work schedule, mostly staying in the dormitory at the Research Institute. I had once complained about him wasting money and taking up space at home. Unexpectedly, it now proved useful. I knew nothing about these things, so I simply did not disturb him. I took a drone and went to the balcony. After getting ready, I controlled the drone to fly down from the 23rd floor, maintaining an altitude of about 3 or 4 floors to observe the streets at that moment. My residence is not far from the CBD in the city center, about 6 or 7 kilometers away, and it was no problem for my drone to fly there. Along the way, I found that there weren't many zombies on the streets, and even fewer in the commercial areas, with more gathering in residential areas, probably because at the very beginning of the incident, messages were issued advising everyone not to go outside, so not many people foolishly ran out. Most people were now prepared and holed up safely at home. As I controlled the drone to fly back, a roaring sound overhead made me look up, and I saw a military helicopter hovering above. It circled over the community and then left. I reported this to Emerson, who didn't have much of a reaction, just saying, "The authorities will definitely send rescue teams or distribute supplies to the public. They must be doing their best to research an antidote now." As a state worker, Emerson really trusts the government. 10. Today is the 5th day since the zombie outbreak, and the city is still operating normally, with no power or water cuts. However, no one dares to use the water, at most using it to flush the toilet. Nothing much happened in the last 2 days. Emerson is still researching that damned virus, and a helicopter still flies over the city every day for surveillance. In the first 2 days, you could still hear people shouting and the sounds of fighting outside the community, but after 2 days, the city fell into dead silence. Emerson was right after all. When the city becomes so quiet that no one dares make a sound, any little noise becomes starkly apparent. Right now, for instance, I can hear the sound of a soccer ball being kicked around by a zombie downstairs, the thud echoing clearly. If there's one specific change these past few days, it's that the number of zombies seems to have increased. Occasionally, people who venture out in search of supplies fail to escape the encircling hordes. Some, overwhelmed by despair, have rushed downstairs screaming at the zombies, "Come on, eat me, I don't want to live anymore. Damn this apocalyptic world. If you eat me, I won't have to live in fear." And so, they got their wish, but these people are the minority. Most are staying put at home, playing it safe. Recently, I've noticed some traits of the zombies. When the sun is out, their movements are noticeably sluggish, much slower than at night. They move like slow-moving turtles and seem to be light-sensitive. They are blind, as the failure of their organs before death leaves their bodily functions inoperable, controlled only by the virus inhabiting their central nervous system, mechanically carrying out the virus's commands, though they can't see. Zombies are extremely sensitive to surrounding noises. Emerson explained this isn't because they can still hear, but because the virus in their central nervous system is particularly sensitive to sound waves. Simply put, the virus residing in their damaged central nervous system acts as the control room of their bodies, sensing everything around them and issuing commands to the zombies themselves. Also, if they don't feed for about 3 days, they enter a frenzied state, might start cannibalizing each other, and even show a slight increase in mobility. One day, as I sat on the windowsill with binoculars observing the zombies wandering below, a young boy zombie caught my eye. He had no legs and wore a blood-stained, tattered Ultraman shirt. He sat unconsciously on a swing, the noise of which attracted the attention of nearby zombies. Realizing he was one of them, they soon ignored him. On the second and third day, the young boy zombie was still swinging. It seemed he couldn't get off. I wondered if he would be stuck swinging forever. However, what happened next shocked me. The zombies that had been indifferent to him in the previous days suddenly had red, glowing eyes. Their movements, though still slow, were noticeably quicker than the days before, though not as fast as at night. The surrounding zombies swarmed him, devouring him completely. After the frenzied zombies dispersed, all I saw under the swing seat was a pile of dark blue blood and fragments of clothes, chewed beyond recognition. They left nothing of the boy, not even his bones. Over the next few days, incidents of zombies cannibalizing each other continued to occur, yet their numbers did not seem to decrease significantly. We didn't know if more people had recklessly ventured out. As a week passed, aside from daily helicopter patrols, the government had not provided any more updates or instructions. Day 30 of the zombie siege, a full month, and the number of zombies kept growing. Most residents' food supplies were so depleted that they had no choice but to venture out for resources. I spent my days controlling drones from the balcony to observe the city's condition. I had grown accustomed to the grotesque forms and blood-smeared faces of the zombies. Even when my drone accidentally crashed into a zombie's face, I remained calm, and out of boredom, I started rating each zombie's appearance. The city center hospital had completely turned into a zombie stronghold, with a number significantly larger than those beneath my apartment complex. The workgroup chat on my phone had long stopped receiving new messages. Faces I recognized emerged from the horde, their nurse uniforms and lab coats stained with blood. With tears in my eyes, I maneuvered the drone back home, feeling desolate, but also full of respect for these colleagues who had selflessly given their lives. The potato plants I had sown on my balcony were beginning to sprout. Nico spent his days chasing flies and mosquitoes around the balcony for fun. Speaking of which, my building's top floor was the 26th, featuring a rooftop garden, so it used to attract bees and butterflies, and at night, a few dead bees would fall on my balcony. However, since the outbreak, I haven't seen these creatures anymore. More and more, we find ourselves plagued by flies and mosquitoes, even though it's already February. City usually experiences snowfall every year. However, this year, not only is there no snow, but the sun blazes fiercely, often pushing temperatures up to 40 degrees Celsius. Emerson calls this extreme weather. On the bright side, the intense heat during the day makes the zombies move even slower, driving them to seek shade under trees or inside buildings. The downside is that the sense of despair online has intensified, with more and more people posting their so-called final words. Eventually, online activity has taken a nosedive. Fortunately, the city still has power, and air conditioning is operational. This is probably why the military hasn't sent any rescue teams for a whole month. They likely think we can still survive. I often bring up the topic of rescue with Emerson. As time passes, his unwavering belief gradually turns into silence. Close to evening, a head peered down from the 24th floor at the top of my home's terrace. To be precise, it wasn't a human head, nor was it a zombie's head. It was a robot's head. Through the wire mesh of my balcony, it looked at me with its shiny mechanical eyes. Startled, I ran back inside to fetch Emerson, who was engrossed in his research, but by the time I brought Emerson to the balcony, the robotic head had disappeared. On the balcony, I found a white note that had drifted down from above. Both Emerson and I saw a hint of panic in each other's eyes. The note starkly read, "Hello. I have been observing you for a long time." Emerson and I were cautious about making any sudden moves. Although household robots are common these days, in these apocalyptic times, one cannot be too careful around anyone. After a while, probably because the person above didn't notice any movement, the robotic head slowly reappeared. When its mechanical eyes saw Emerson and me staring straight at it from the balcony, it quickly withdrew, quite intelligent, quietly. Emerson and I decided that if it dared to peer down again, we would smash it to pieces with a hammer. As expected, the robotic head reappeared after a short while. Just as Emerson was about to swing the hammer, the robot seemed to anticipate what was about to happen. It raised its hands in surrender above its head and opened its mouth with a mechanical voice, saying, "Please don't hurt me, I mean you no harm." Emerson paused. Hammer in midair. Who are you? The robot paused for a moment, and after a few seconds, as if receiving instructions, mechanically replied, I am a resident living above your floor. What do you want? Could you give me some food? Emerson and I exchanged glances. Are you alone? Yes, I frowned. You've been observing us for so long, and we don't even know who you are. Why should we give you food? I really have no ill intentions. I've been hungry for almost a week now. Please wait a moment. After saying this, the robot withdrew again. And 2 minutes later, it extended a hand holding an ID down. I took the ID from the robot's hand, a student card from a well-known high school in City A. I flipped it open to see a photo of a young boy named Ezra. Where are your parents? I asked. They haven't come back for a week. Emerson and I looked at each other, both seeing the same question in each other's eyes. Should we help? After a moment of contemplation, my emotions tipped the scale. I retrieved 2 instant noodles and a bottle of mineral water from our food storage and handed them to the robot. The robot mechanically thanked me and then withdrew. Emerson and I waited a while, and when the robot didn't come down again, we turned and went back inside. What if he asks for more? Asked Emerson. I couldn't help but feel sympathetic. He's still a child. What if the student card isn't his? I pondered for a moment. We have sufficient supplies, and once the crops mature, we should be able to sustain ourselves for a long time, even if he is just trying to exploit our sympathy for food. I think, as long as we ensure our safety, we can afford to help a little. Emerson said nothing more. I knew what he meant. He agreed. I want to join you. It's not safe out there, and it's dangerous for me to be home alone. I can help with things like fixing electronics or other machinery, and I can cook. On the 35th day of the zombie outbreak, I woke up to a cold room with Emerson still sleeping beside me. I tried to turn off the air conditioning only to realize it had stopped working at some point. Pressing the remote several times did nothing, so I went to check the circuit breaker. It hadn't tripped, but none of the electricals in the house were working, and the darkness enveloped the room without any lights. The digital clock, fully charged the day before, showed it was 5:29 a.m. I went to the balcony to check the weather and shivered as I opened the door. Just yesterday, it was 38 degrees, but today, the thermometer on the balcony read a mere 3 degrees, with dense clouds overhead and a light drizzle falling. This was the first rain in a city in over a month. On the balcony, I found a note soaked by the rain, its ink blurred by the droplets. The passageway door is locked. I couldn't get through, so I left the food in your fire escape. I took the note back to the bedroom and woke Emerson, who rubbed his sleepy eyes and took it from my hand. The family upstairs. I nodded. Also, it seems we've lost power. Hearing this, Emerson got out of bed to check the electrical and water supply, then looked outside from the balcony. The streetlights, which usually turned off at 6 in the morning, were all out. Looks like the whole city is out of water and power. I'll set up the generator and water pump later, he said. Closing the balcony door, after a few seconds of silence, he picked up a hammer from the table. Let's go check on the food that kid mentioned. Seeing him arm himself with a hammer, I chose a clothes rod for its longer reach, which suited me better. We cautiously opened our apartment door, making sure the corridor was clear before stepping out towards the fire escape. I handed Emerson the keys, and we communicated with gestures. He would unlock the door while I used the clothes rod to check outside. If any danger appeared once the door was opened, Emerson would be ready with his hammer. Once in position, Emerson used the keys to unlock the security lock I had installed, its loud click echoing down the empty hallway. He carefully pushed the door open, and something fell out from behind it, rolling to the doorframe. It was a bottle of mineral water. Pushing the door further, he spotted 2 buckets of instant noodles. He looked up at me, seeing no immediate danger. He peeked his head out to check the corridor, and I followed suit. Together, we saw a boy, identical to the one on the student ID, sleeping against the wall. Emerson and I exchanged glances. The noise seemed to startle the boy, who suddenly opened his eyes and met our gaze. The young boy, somewhat awkwardly, stood up, his hands nervously behind his back, and flashed a pleading smile at Emerson and me. Brother, sister, hello, are you Ezra? Emerson's grip on the hammer tightened though he held it at his side. Initially, I had imagined this daring student to be robust and strong, but he appeared rather frail as he stood. His complexion was slightly jaundiced, hinting at malnutrition. He nodded. Why are you sleeping here? I was puzzled, considering the current unsafe conditions outside one's home, and yet he dared to sleep in the fire escape. I was scared, he admitted sheepishly. I originally planned to send the items over to your balcony using a robot last night, but after a long time of trying, I couldn't see you, so I left them in the fire escape. I left you a note. He gestured towards the instant noodles and water on the ground. Around 3 in the morning, I was still working on the robot, but then the power went out at home. I got scared, so I thought I'd try my luck to see if you'd come out. And then, having met us, what do you want to do? He paused, seemingly gathering a lot of courage to continue. I want to join you. It's very unsafe outside, and it's dangerous for me to be at home alone. I can help with things, like fixing electronic devices or other machinery, and I can cook too. Emerson frowned and glanced at me upon hearing what I said. Aren't you the one who said there was a shortage of supplies? Then how did these come about? I asked. Pointing to the goods on the ground, scratching his head, he replied, last week, my robot wasn't fully functional yet. I had planned to wait until the robot was perfected before using it to go out and find supplies, but I just couldn't hold out that day, so I ended up offending you both. It was only yesterday morning that I finally got the robot working properly, and in the afternoon, I tested it by controlling it to scavenge the remaining food and water from the nearest supermarket's warehouse. That robot, did you make it yourself? I asked, somewhat surprised, turning to look at Emerson, who also appeared astonished. We had thought it was just a standard domestic robot. Yes, we need to think about this, Emerson said, pulling me back into the hallway and closing the door to the safety passage. The moment Emerson closed the door, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the boy's bewildered expression. He seemed to hang his head as if he had done something wrong, looking somewhat disheartened. What do you think? Emerson asked me. After pondering for a moment, I replied, actually, I think it's okay, and your reason, I don't think he's lying. If he really has the ability to create and control a robot to go out and gather supplies, that could be very helpful to us. Emerson also paused to think for a moment. All right, I'll take your word for it. The door to the fire escape opened again, and there he was, still with his head down on the steps. Hearing us, he looked up, his eyes filled with hope. Do you have anything you need to pack? I asked. His face lit up with joy, and he nodded vigorously. Yes, just give me a moment, please. With those words, he dashed upstairs and returned about 10 minutes later, each shoulder carrying a bulging travel backpack, and in his arms he held the robot we had already seen. This little guy, seemingly frail, was surprisingly strong. He followed me into the hallway, with Emerson bringing up the rear, and the door to the fire escape was locked again. Ezra brought a backpack full of food and water, and another full of equipment and parts, mostly for his robot research. He was quite surprised by the amount of supplies that filled our 3 rooms. I knew you had supplies, but I didn't expect there to be so much. I poured him a glass of water as he sat on the sofa. Your parents, did they go out to find supplies? I asked tentatively. Ezra nodded, a sad memory seeming to cross his mind. My parents usually work away from home, so most of the time it's just me and my little brother, who's in the 3rd grade, at home. 2 weeks before the zombie outbreak, I had just returned from a robot competition in the capital. My brother had been placed in my grandmother's home in City B. 2 days before the outbreak, after the news broadcast about the epidemic, my parents' work was also suspended, and they came back, thinking that my brother would be safe at my grandmother's and following the news advice to avoid running around during the epidemic. They didn't go to pick him up until 2 weeks ago. He paused, his voice breaking slightly with a sob. We lost contact with my grandmother's family. My parents were very anxious and decided to risk going to bring my brother back themselves, and then they never returned, and their phones went from unanswered to turned off. I was quite moved and handed a tissue to the boy, who had started to cry uncontrollably. Emerson stood by, silently smoking a cigarette. Since the zombie outbreak, he had been smoking more frequently. Emerson extinguished his cigarette, patted Ezra's trembling shoulders, and sighed. They must still be alive. He looked out the window. Sometimes no news is good news. We reorganized the supplies again and cleared out a small bedroom for Ezra to move into. When the afternoon arrived, the rain stopped, the sky was bathed in a shade of orange-red, and the sun appeared significantly larger than usual. Suddenly, the temperature soared to 35 degrees Celsius. Emerson and Ezra, enduring the intense heat, set up the solar generator and solar water pump on the terrace. Emerson had initially prepared a thick manual, but with Ezra's help, they didn't even need to consult it. The equipment was up and running in no time. With electricity and water supply restored at home, I installed thick blackout curtains over the terrace doors and all the windows to prevent any other survivors from discovering that we still had power. After spending a day together, we got to know Ezra better. He was a science prodigy who made headlines last year due to an international robotics competition. If not for this unforeseen incident, he would have been fast-tracked to a prestigious university abroad. Knowing that Emerson was researching the virus, Ezra volunteered eagerly to join the research. Originally, when Emerson decided to research the virus, he had set up another living room with isolation sheets, transforming it into a small laboratory. The area underwent multiple rounds of disinfection daily, and entering the lab required protective gear such as suits and face shields. The two of them spent the whole afternoon in the lab, and it took much coaxing from me before they reluctantly came out for dinner. Regrettably, there were still no significant breakthroughs. A week passed peacefully, and the military helicopters that patrolled the city skies finally brought some news. The military announced that the National Refuge and Survival Areas were nearing completion and asked everyone to wait a little longer without venturing out, ensuring their safety. Rescue teams would be dispatched soon, a message meant to reassure the survivors who had been struggling for nearly 2 months. It had been 42 days, and I wasn't sure how many people saw this message, but I knew the number of zombies in the streets was increasing daily, and in our complex, we could only hear their eerie groans. Since the city's power went out, the internet had also been cut off. Residents used to check in daily on the community group chat. Up until 2 days before the power outage, dozens of families reported in each day, but that number had dwindled to only 7 or 8. While helping Emerson with the virus research, Ezra also improved his robot, enhancing its functions. His robot became increasingly intelligent and could even engage in simple conversations with humans. Thus, my entertainment options expanded to include teasing the robot, whom I named Finian for its quirky and spirited nature. One morning, I woke up to find Emerson and Ezra discussing something excitedly on the sofa, so engrossed that they didn't even notice my presence. What's there to be happy about? I hadn't seen Emerson smile in a long time, so I approached and playfully linked my arm with his. We discovered last night that the virus has decreased in size, Emerson said, his voice filled with excitement and his tone rising unintentionally. This was undoubtedly a significant discovery. How did you manage that? Does it shrink over time? Last night, I was just intending to clean the test tubes, so I turned on the ultrasonic cleaner. After cleaning them, I noticed that the virus had significantly reduced in size. Is it sensitive to sound waves? Yes, but the frequency of sound waves that humans can tolerate only makes them somewhat more sensitive, and it doesn't harm them much. Rather, it might even invigorate them. However, if we use ultrasonics, it could have a considerable impact on them, possibly even weakening their ability to spread. Is it just weakened? Emerson pondered for a moment. Ultrasonics can only impact them to a certain extent, but I think infrasonics might be more effective against them, or even eradicate them completely. What's the difference between ultrasonics and infrasonics? Emerson glanced at Ezra, signaling him to explain. Ezra understood and said, their vibration frequencies are different. Ultrasonics have frequencies above 20,000 Hz, while infrasonics are below 20 Hz. Simply put, infrasonics can harm the human body. They are even used in military weapons because the vibration frequency of infrasonics is very similar to that of human organs, which can cause displacement and affect the nervous system. In severe cases, it can lead to mental disorders and death, but ultrasonic waves are actually beneficial to the human body, I said, nodding in semi-understanding before asking, so infrasound can affect viruses that reside in human nerves and destroy them. This is just my hypothesis, but I think it's very feasible. However, we're missing a crucial piece of equipment, which is at the Research Institute, Emerson said, looking somewhat frustrated. I wanted to report this to the higher-ups so they could take action, but we've just discovered that all outgoing calls are out of service, so we can't get in touch with them. I pondered for a moment. If this method was viable, it could indeed be a way to save the world. Since we couldn't contact the outside, how would we solve the equipment issue? We could wait for the military to arrive and then report to them, I suggested. They exchanged a glance, and Ezra spoke up. Actually, the equipment Emerson mentioned isn't very large. We could potentially bring it home. Are you guys crazy? I jumped up from the sofa, shocked, seeing my agitated state. Ezra quickly stood up and gestured with his hands to calm me down. Emerson pulled me back to sit on the sofa. No, it's not about us going out ourselves. Georgia, did you forget we have a robot? He pointed to a small robot standing beside the TV. The robot, sensing we were talking about it, tilted its mechanical head slightly in an odd manner. Master, do you need something? Emerson was in charge of opening the fire exit door to send the robot, Finian, into the corridor before locking the door and coming back. Initially, we planned to let Finian use an elevator card to go directly to the basement and drive to the Research Institute, but I vetoed that idea. If something went wrong, if the elevator card was lost or fell into the wrong hands, it would put us in great danger. Ezra connected the video feed from Finian's camera to his laptop, and Emerson and I sat beside him as he controlled Finian to descend the stairs and enter the basement. In the basement, a few zombies wandering around turned their heads toward the noise and quickly charged toward Finian, only to stop 3 steps away, as if they had lost their target, then turned around and aimlessly wandered again. I thought they were sensitive to sound. Why didn't they attack Finian? I asked, puzzled. The last time I controlled Finian, I noticed this too, but I don't know why, Ezra replied, shrugging as he swiftly maneuvered the keyboard. I looked at Emerson, who was frowning at the screen. I think they're not just sensitive to sound, they might also distinguish human sense. Ezra nodded in agreement, looking at the screen. That makes sense. If they were just sensitive to sound and attacked any source indiscriminately, many machines would have been torn apart by now, provided their teeth were strong enough. Ezra expertly controlled Finian to a small van with the driver's door open and some human remains scattered on the ground. This is the van I found when I controlled Finian to gather supplies the other day. It was parked in front of a supermarket then. The owner had turned into a zombie, half of his body lying on the driver's seat, the lower half gone. I had Finian drag him out and we took the van, he explained as he, under Emerson's guidance, drove Finian toward the research institute. Along the way, we noticed many abandoned cars on the roadside or crashed into each other, blocking the road. Emerson directed Ezra to take another route, but Ezra's hands froze on the keyboard, staring blankly at the computer screen. What's wrong? I asked, noticing something was off, and patted his shoulder. His eyes suddenly reddened, pointing at an SUV on the screen that had collided with a small truck. That's my family's car, Emerson, and I fell silent. Ezra controlled Finian to get off the van and walked over to the SUV to look inside, which was now empty. Tears streamed down his cheeks without a sound as he slowly maneuvered Finian around the vehicle. On the other side, he found a young zombie with red eyes gnawing and another adult female zombie lying beneath it, next to a disfigured zombie body with dried brains scattered on the ground, barely recognizable in a black tracksuit. The female zombie wasn't dead yet, her eyes also blood red. Clearly both zombies were in a frenzied state. The female zombie unexpectedly did not resist the young zombie clinging to her. Through the high-definition footage transmitted back by the drone, I could almost see tears shimmering in the eyes of the female zombie. Ezra, sitting in front of the computer screen, could no longer control himself and burst into tears, burying his face in his hands. His cries, filled with despair, intermittently conveyed to us, "That's my little brother, and my parents." Ezra wept for a long time, until the drone started sending low battery warnings, its screen flashing red repeatedly. We didn't dare disturb him, as both Emerson and I had experienced similar pain, but his was even more brutal and heartbreaking. By the time he lifted his tear-streaked face, his younger brother had already wandered off to the end of the street. Having eaten his fill, he watched the now distorted small figure on the screen for a long time, then silently wiped away his tears, and remotely opened the SUV's door with the drone, retrieving a photo pinned under a pair of sunglasses on the dashboard. It was a family portrait, showing a happy family of 4. He then activated the drone's solar charging system and moved it to a spot on the road where the sunlight was strongest. The sun was intense that day, and it only took 10 minutes for the drone to charge up to 80%, which was sufficient for a trip to the institute and back. "How should we proceed, Emerson?" Ezra asked, his voice thick with emotion as he tried to suppress the sob in his throat. Emerson extinguished the third cigarette he had just lit. "Turn around, left turn." The journey was uneventful, apart from the clumsy zombies that heard the car and tried to chase after us, but couldn't keep up. Under remote guidance, the drone opened the gates to the institute. The once bright institute was now dark and grim, filled with human remains and wandering zombies. Emerson, looking at the place where he had worked for 6 years since graduation, appeared dazed, his eyes slightly red. With Emerson's guidance, finding the equipment on the second floor of the institute went smoothly, and the drone even managed to collect some files on the virus from the lab. However, as the drone was about to leave the lab and the second floor, we were stunned by a horrifying sight. A huge male zombie, over 2 meters tall, was sweeping through the institute with 4 long tentacles, knocking over all the machinery, experimental reagents, and chemicals. We froze for a few seconds until the zombie started heading straight towards the drone, pulling us back to reality. Emerson quickly directed Ezra to another passageway, and Ezra swiftly maneuvered the drone in the opposite direction, gliding quickly as if the drone had roller skates. Swiftly reaching another sloped passageway, the zombie, hearing the noise, relentlessly pursued the drone, its tentacles occasionally sweeping towards it. "Don't zombies identify humans by smell and not attack the drone?" I asked, puzzled, looking at Emerson. "This zombie has mutated. It's indiscriminately attacking the source of the sound. Must be in a berserk phase," Emerson explained. Ezra pulled up the rearview monitor on the drone, displaying both front and rear views, while controlling the drone to dash towards the institute's exit, dodging the zombie's tentacles. The zombie moved incredibly fast in the dark building, making the escape extremely perilous. Once outside, exposed to the sunlight, its movements slowed considerably, though it was still more agile than other berserk-phase zombies. The drone hurried into the van, and Ezra quickly started the vehicle, flooring the accelerator and weaving through 2 street blocks before finally losing the pursuing monstrous zombie. Ezra, sweating profusely, leaned back in his seat and sighed in relief. Good thing I had installed switchable rollers on its base that day when he was chased by a zombie at the supermarket. He was too slow, and I realized he wouldn't have escaped this time without them. Emerson and I, however, were still preoccupied with thoughts of the mutated zombie. Had it really undergone a secondary mutation, including the berserk phase? Wouldn't that mean a third mutation? As Ezra steered the drone back home, night had already fallen, and the drone's battery was nearly depleted. The power it had gathered during the day should have been enough to get it home, but the encounter with the mutated zombie had drained much of its battery. We were still a block away from home. Perhaps we could shut down the drone's power now and wait for the sun to come up tomorrow. That way, it can use the remaining power to recharge, I suggested, reluctantly. Ezra put the drone into standby mode. That's all we can do for now. We sat around the dining table, eating self-heating rice, and discussing the monster we encountered at the Institute earlier. Was that a third mutation? What could have caused such further mutation? I stirred my rice aimlessly, my appetite lost. Could it be because the Institute itself had lots of chemicals? I pondered aloud. Could the mutation be caused by the chemical reaction that occurred when the zombies came into contact with these chemicals? Ezra's rice remained untouched in his bowl. He had been hanging his head low, but perked up and pondered for a moment upon hearing my question before responding. Emerson shook his head. That's probably not the reason. Otherwise, if the research facility had been overrun for a month, there wouldn't be just one zombie that had mutated 3 times, there would be many more. What could be the reason then? Are their weaknesses the same as regular zombies, where shooting them in the head would suffice? In theory, yes, even if mutated. The virus in their central nervous system remains their weakness. It's just that their combat abilities are much stronger, but it's just too big. According to the preliminary analysis data that Finian sent back, it's over 2 meters tall and built like a bodybuilder. Don't humans retain their original body shape when they turn into zombies? Can such a mutation cause their already dead bodily functions and ceased bone growth to develop a second time? Is that even possible? I found it somewhat unbelievable. Georgia, since the outbreak, we've seen enough of the impossible, and indeed, this creature has grown that large. Ezra sighed and said softly, lowering his head, indeed, we've already seen enough of the impossible. Things we once thought utterly implausible are slowly becoming reality. What else could not happen in this world? I was momentarily at a loss for words, stopped speaking, and silently scooped another spoonful of rice into my mouth. In a way, mutation is akin to evolution. Each zombie mutation is a step towards becoming stronger, so it's not impossible for mutations to cause a second growth in their bones. Ancient civilizations even had giants, which, scientifically speaking, were also due to genetic mutations, Emerson explained. It's not that I didn't believe it, I just didn't want to. I always hoped for humanity to eradicate the zombies and return to normal society sooner rather than later. I didn't want to believe that our path seemed to be getting increasingly difficult. The development of events was not as smooth as we had imagined. The weather seemed to be deliberately opposing us. The next day was overcast, and it never got bright. It was as if someone had draped a blackout cloth over the sky, continuously pouring water down like buckets from above. Emerson and Ezra, concerned about Finian and the equipment and documents in the car, were visibly anxious. One kept running out to the balcony to check the sky, while the other paced back and forth in the living room. The streets were swarming with zombies, who, due to the noise of the rain, were rampaging everywhere, some even colliding so violently that they broke each other's arms. I stroked Nico, who was sleeping on my lap, feeling rather indifferent. My biggest headache was the extremely variable weather causing Nico to catch a cold. By the next day, the rain had not shown any signs of stopping and was getting even heavier. The streets were half flooded, feeling almost as high as half a building, and the zombies moved even slower in the water, slower than turtles. If this rain doesn't stop, the car will be submerged, then the equipment and documents will be useless. Emerson said, looking at the gloomy sky outside, worried. What should we do? We can't just go out and risk it. If it really comes down to it, let's just wait for rescue. We'll report our findings and situation to the military. They will conduct a more in-depth study. Who knows, maybe they've already found something and are researching it. The experts in the Capitol's secret team have deeper access to and studies on this virus than you. Emerson remained silent, sitting to the side. While Ezra opened his mouth with some difficulty, "I want to rescue Finian," I looked at him in surprise, while Emerson just took a drag on his cigarette and stayed quiet, as if he had anticipated this. "Finian is a robot I spent 3 years building. It's like my child. I can't just abandon it. It's the only family I have now." He paused. "Besides, Emerson's data and equipment are still in the car. What if the rescue team never arrives? Have you seen zombie movies? Most of them feature a city called Experiment Field, which is essentially a forsaken city. The more we know about zombies' weaknesses, the better for us." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with determination. Nico, feeling unwell, kept whimpering in my arms, and I stroked its fluffy head, feeling a pang of sympathy. I could understand Ezra's feelings for Finian, just as I felt for Nico, so I said no more. The atmosphere hung heavy for a long while, after finishing his cigarette. Emerson stubbed it out and said, "I talked with Ezra last night. Given the current speed of the zombies, as long as we're fast, they aren't a big threat to us." Ezra mentioned that his family often goes to the beach during holidays, and his father even bought a RIB, rigid inflatable boat, especially for this purpose and kept it at home. "It's highly feasible for us to retrieve our belongings." I knew what a RIB was, a rigid inflatable boat that could move quickly on water with relatively low noise, offering performance far superior to most leisure boats. Looking at the two of them, who clearly had everything planned out, I knew I couldn't stop them. "Since you've decided, I certainly can't stop you. Just be safe," I said, turning my head away, feeling a lump in my throat. "Sis, don't worry, we'll be back safe and sound soon." Ezra reassured me. After saying that, Emerson came over and gave me a gentle hug and a kiss on the forehead. Without saying a word, he handed me a walkie-talkie before he left with Ezra to fetch the boat. Since the city's power was out, the elevator was out of service too. They had to carry the boat down from the 23rd floor, and it would be the same when returning. I launched my drone, flying it down the emergency staircase floor by floor to scout for any danger ahead of them. Fortunately, the stairwell was very safe. Free from zombies, the doors at each level were securely shut, showing that people were still vigilant. It seemed that apart from the lobby, the upper floors of our building had not been breached. I accompanied them to the stairwell, watching as they carried the boat downstairs. The window of the stairwell on the second floor was shattered. After losing sight of them, I flew the drone out through the broken window to circle around to the lobby to check the situation. The lobby was half flooded, with most zombies submerged up to their waists, moving slowly and aimlessly in the water. About 10 minutes later, the door to the first-floor emergency exit was pushed open, the water rushed in, and the zombies in the water slowly turned their heads. Emerson and Ezra, on the RIB, sped through, catching the zombies off guard. After a brief pause, realizing these were living people, the zombies started moving towards them. However, due to the resistance of the water and their inherently slow movement, they could only struggle ineffectively. Before the zombies could get close, the pair had already sped out of the lobby. The zombies on the road turned around, just like those in the lobby, all trying to chase after them. My heart was in my throat as I watched the live feed from the drone. The main gate of the complex had been left open since the time zombies swarmed in over the past few days. With no large-scale exodus leading to infections, the zombies had dispersed considerably, posing no real threat to their boat. Watching them safely exit the complex, I finally felt a little relief. Given the current situation, they were unlikely to face significant danger reaching the spot where Finian was located. The challenge would be when they arrived to move the items and on their way back. The boat was fast in the water, and in less than 10 minutes, they approached Finian's location. Fortunately, with no zombies around, the van still had over half of its body above the water level, preventing too much water from seeping in, and it seemed that the equipment and Finian inside were still safe. They quickly maneuvered the boat to the side of the van and opened the passenger door. Rainwater rushed in, and I saw Ezra jump from the boat onto the van, then crawl to the back seat to hand over the machinery and documents to Emerson, and then move Finian from the driver's seat to give to Emerson. As zombies, attracted by the noise, began to approach the boat. Unable to hear, I could only see through the images as Emerson continuously shouted, "Quick, quick!" Ezra suddenly turned back as he was about to jump onto the boat, returning to the van to open the glove compartment, seemingly searching for something. Then I saw Emerson swiftly close the van door. Driving the boat away from the vehicle, Ezra sat in the van, looking tense, silent. I cried in front of the screen, only to see Emerson steering the boat towards the approaching zombie, wielding a hammer in his hand. As he neared the zombie, he swung the hammer. A shot to the head, blood splattered everywhere, and the surrounding water quickly turned red with blood. Emerson didn't dare to relax. He immediately drove the assault boat back to the car, and Ezra seized the opportunity to open the car door and jumped onto the boat successfully. I saw Ezra clutching a photo tightly in his hand. As other zombies had just approached the car, the assault boat quickly sped away, narrowly escaping the zombie encirclement and starting the return journey. I finally breathed a sigh of relief, but before I could fully relax, I turned the drone around to check the situation behind us and spotted an even more critical situation. It was the thrice mutated zombie. It had wandered for 2 days and made its way here. I continuously maneuvered the drone above Emerson's head, trying to get their attention. Emerson, knowing me well from years of working together, sensed something was off and turned to look back. The mutated zombie was chasing after their boat, continuously stretching out its tentacles in an attempt to reach them. Unfortunately, it was still quite far from the boat, and the resistance of moving through water also limited its speed. The assault boat moved swiftly and unobstructed on the water, increasing the distance between them and the pursuing mutated zombie. The zombie seemed frustrated at not being able to catch them, constantly emitting beast-like roars. As Emerson approached the entrance of the residential area, the mutated zombie was still doggedly chasing them from a distance. Emerson quickly turned the boat's head around and steered into another street, sitting on the sofa. I was so shocked by his maneuver that I stood up, confusedly making the drone dance wildly above him. "We need to shake it off first." Emerson freed one hand to speak into the walkie-talkie. I instantly understood. He was worried that the mutated zombie would discover our hiding place. Sure enough, the zombie chased in their direction, but Emerson, familiar with the area, dodged the ordinary zombies on the roads while turning left and right to shake off the mutated one. Given the boat's top speed limitations, and the zombie moving equally fast, Emerson could only keep weaving through the streets. I couldn't remember how many turns he made. Just watching the images sent back by the drone was making me dizzy. All I knew was that the boat was getting further from our residential area, and so was the mutated zombie. I glanced at the digital clock. They had been evading the zombie for a full half hour, and sweat was already streaming down my forehead. Looking at the drone's distance display, they were now 12 kilometers away from the residential area, and at this point, the boat finally stopped making random turns. I controlled the drone to look back, and sure enough, the mutated zombie was no longer in sight. At that moment, Emerson made several gestures to the drone. Given the 12-kilometer distance, our walkie-talkies, which I had specifically bought during times of stocking up supplies, had a maximum range of only 10 kilometers and were naturally unable to connect. He first pointed towards the road ahead, then made a walking motion with 2 fingers, and finally mimicked a binocular gesture with both hands. I quickly understood his intention. He wanted me to scout ahead with the drone. I maneuvered the drone at full speed towards the road ahead, knowing that our pursuers weren't limited to just that mutated zombie. The ordinary zombies along the way weren't blind either, so Emerson continued to follow the drone's flight path at a steady pace. After every turn, when I found no anomalies, I would circle back in the air to signal OK. Only then did Emerson dare to speed up and move forward. Finally, they safely returned to the residential area after nearly 40 minutes, and by then, it was gradually getting dark. I had prepared a home hoist crane at home, specially left by the window without wire mesh. Throughout the journey, Ezra didn't idle either. He wrapped Emerson's equipment and Finian in waterproof cloth and tied them with hemp rope. When the boat reached the building, he hung Finian and the equipment onto the hoist crane, and I pulled them up from upstairs. After starting the hoist crane, I continued to monitor their situation with the drone as they drove the boat into the fire escape and got off. After exiting the boat, they jointly closed and locked the ground floor fire escape door, keeping the zombies out and leaving them to fruitlessly ram against the door. The two didn't dare to rest, and together, they carried the boat upstairs. It was easy going downstairs, but hard going up. It took them 20 minutes of walking and resting to safely reach home. The hoist crane also successfully completed its mission, safely delivering the equipment and Finian to our floor when Emerson and Ezra, drenched, finally got home. I couldn't help but rush into Emerson's arms and burst into tears. With a resigned smile, Emerson said to me, "I'm all wet, I might get you soaked too. It's so cold, you shouldn't get sick with us. After all, if we fall ill, you'll have to take care of us, sis. I told you we'd come back safe," Ezra added with a smile. I playfully punched Emerson a couple of times in his chest. "You two can still joke about this, heartless, both of you, sis. Please don't cry. Can we take a rare bath today?" I let go of Emerson, wiping my tears as I spoke. "I've already heated the water for you two. Hurry up and bathe. Don't catch a cold or fever tomorrow. I'm not in the mood to pamper you lords. I've hung the towels in the bathroom already." Emerson patted my head and was pulled into the bathroom by Ezra for a bath. Watching their safe figures, I finally felt a weight lift off my heart. I couldn't bear to think what I would do if something had actually happened to them. how I would continue to survive alone in this apocalypse. Thankfully they were okay. The next day, I finally returned to work at home. The sky outside was brighter than it had been, though the sun was still hidden, and the heavy rain had turned into a light drizzle. True to my predictions, both of them caught a cold, and simultaneously developed high fevers. The big and the small one lay side by side in the master bedroom, fever patches on their foreheads, a sight somewhat comical. I busied myself preparing medicine and forcing them to drink lots of hot water. Sis, can we stop drinking hot water? This is the first time I've felt like throwing up from drinking water since the zombie outbreak, Ezra protested weakly from the bed. A stern look from me was enough for him to immediately shut up, painfully gulping down his 5th cup of hot water. Suddenly, I thought I heard some noise outside. I figured it was probably Nico knocking something over in the living room again. But when I checked, I found Nico lying in his bed feeling under the weather, and the robot, Nico, stood properly next to the TV charging. Confused, I tilted my head, thinking I must have heard wrong. Just as I was about to go back to tending to the sick, the strange noise came again. This time, it was clear that it was coming from the terrace. The terrace door was heavily draped, and I couldn't see outside directly, so I tiptoed to the edge of the curtain and slightly lifted a corner. A burly man was using pliers to cut through the wire mesh outside my terrace. The man had a fierce look, with a long scar over his left eye that was quite intimidating. I jumped in shock, and the man, equally alert, grabbed the wire mesh with one hand and pulled out a gun with the other, firing a shot in my direction, his eyes filled with murderous intent. The bullet didn't hit me. I had replaced all the glass in the house with bulletproof tempered glass, and the bullet only made a small dent. Realizing that he couldn't shoot through the glass, he cursed under his breath and started to cut the wire mesh even more aggressively, even using the gun to try and forcibly break through. Terrified, I let go of the curtain and collapsed to the floor, screaming Emerson's name repeatedly. Hearing the commotion, Emerson and Ezra ran out from their room. Trembling, I pointed towards the terrace and stammered, "Outside, there's a man, he's cutting through our wire mesh, and he has a gun." Emerson rushed into the room, grabbed a gun, and pulled back the curtain to aim at the man outside. Seeing Emerson, the intruder stopped his activities, and with a look of frustration, quickly started climbing up a rope. Only then did I notice that he was tied to a safety rope, apparently having climbed down from above, once the man was out of sight. Emerson put down his gun and pulled me into his arms to comfort me. "Where did you get a gun?" I asked after calming down. "It's fake." Emerson handed me the gun to see. "A colleague's kid brought it over last year to play with and forgot to take it back. I also forgot to return it. I just remembered this incident, thought it might scare him a bit." "Ezra, do you know the residence on the 25th floor?" Emerson turned to ask Ezra, who was also visibly shaken by the side. Ezra thought carefully and replied, "I don't know them, but I've seen them a few times when taking the elevator. I live on the 24th floor, and just above me is the 25th floor. Sometimes, when the elevator comes down from the 25th floor, I see a middle-aged woman dressed quite lavishly, sometimes accompanied by a little girl. Occasionally, there's also a man with them, but he's a portly man in a suit. I've never seen this man before, when the building was first on sale." Emerson and I had lived at the top floor, the 25th. It's a large duplex, the most expensive unit in each building situated at the top. It was way beyond what Emerson and I could afford, hence, those living on the top floor were either wealthy or distinguished, and that fierce-looking man earlier didn't seem like someone who cared much about quality of life, not to judge by appearances, but he struck me more as someone who lives life on the edge. I noticed that aside from the parts covered by his clothes, his exposed skin had many scars, both old and new intermingled. Even as a nurse who has dealt with numerous injuries from fights in the hospital, I found the sight quite shocking. Moreover, his quick-draw and adept movements were particularly decisive. Could it be a lower-floor resident who ran up to the 26th floor's rooftop garden and then climbed down? I speculated, let's not fuss over where he came from at this moment. What matters is he'll definitely come back down. The moment we opened the blackout curtains, we exposed the fact that we still have power here, making it easy for him to guess we have supplies. At this point, anyone daring enough to do this is definitely after supplies. When people are desperate, they're capable of anything. We can't let our guard down, Emerson said as he picked up some tools and headed towards the patio. "Ezra, help me reinforce these wire meshes." After securing the patio, Ezra installed a detection system and positioned Finian near the edge. If it detected thermal imaging other than us three and Nico, it would immediately trigger an alarm. However, for safety, they still decided to take turns keeping watch at night. "But there's still a critical problem. We don't have any weapons like guns, but that man does," I said worriedly. The three of us fell into deep thought again. It wasn't until Nico suddenly jumped onto my lap. and the static electricity from his fur unexpectedly shocked me, that I recoiled and had a sudden spark of inspiration. What if we electrify the perimeter wire mesh? Emerson and Ezra exchanged looks. Good idea. No sooner said than done. We kept busy until late into the night. If the wire mesh was electrified, that malicious intruder could potentially be electrocuted if he tried to climb it again. I sought their opinions and found myself in full agreement with Emerson. If he shows no mercy, neither will we. Since he wants to kill us, we can't be blamed for not giving him a way out. Ezra strongly agreed. Sis, there are too many bad people in the world, and you're too kind, especially now. In these apocalyptic times, being too kind could cost you your life. Looking out at the dense night, I could only hope he would know better and not come back to bother us again. 24. When I woke up, the day was already bright. The rain had stopped 2 days ago. But today was the first sunny day in a while. The sun hung in the sky, and the temperature had suddenly risen from the recent chilly days. Counting the days, if I remembered correctly, today marked the 50th day since the zombie outbreak. During this period, that man hadn't come down again, and we had also confirmed the feasibility of using sound waves to combat the virus. The results showed that infrasound waves were very effective in attacking the virus. Emerson confirmed with equipment brought back from the Research Institute that even low-power infrasound waves were enough to weaken such a small virus significantly if we aimed to completely eliminate the zombies. However, we would need, low power is definitely not enough. The amount of virus needed to infect people and turn them into zombies is substantial. We can only wait for the military to carry out the rescue and then report our findings. It's up to the country to figure out a policy solution. Out of sheer boredom, Emerson and I huddled together watching a movie we had downloaded before the internet went out, while Nico basked in the sun by the patio door. Ezra, who had been on night watch last night, was catching up on sleep in the room. With 20 minutes left in the movie, Nico suddenly started meowing incessantly at the window, and at that moment, the alarm went off. Someone's here. Emerson and I immediately turned our gaze to the patio. Ezra, hearing the noise, came running out of his room barefoot as if bracing for battle. Is that man back again? A rope dropped from above, and a military boot appeared, stepping onto the barbed wire then quickly releasing, probably due to an electric shock. The person slid down the safety rope and landed just outside our barbed wire, daring not to touch it again. His expression fierce. It was indeed that man. Through the glass door of the patio, Emerson shouted at him, "Don't come here again. The barbed wire around our house is electrified. If you try to come down, you'll only get electrocuted." The man gripped the rope tightly. "Bro, I just want some food." "Why so extreme?" I scoffed. "Just some food." "Then why did you shoot at me that day?" He replied, "Sister, it's about survival. If I don't shoot you, how do I know you won't shoot me, big brother? In survival, what if I trust you and you betray me, taking over my place? Just don't come here. We won't give you any food," I retorted. "He seems unable to climb back up," Ezra suddenly said beside me. "If he tries to climb back, he'll need to use the barbed wire for support, but since it's electrified, he can't climb up. If he wants to escape, he can only slide down to the lower patio." After speaking, he took the keys to the security lock from the table and headed to the foyer. "What are you going to do?" I asked him sharply. "We can't let this man stay. He'll definitely find a way to get in. If we let him go, he'll just find another way to break in. We have 1,000 strategies, and he'll have 10,000. We need to stop him. Don't let him move downwards," he said before leaving the house. I looked at Emerson, somewhat stunned, almost grasping his intention but unable to catch the fleeting thought. Emerson, unresponsive to Ezra's actions, watched the man still hanging on the rope outside the patio. "Brother, I just need some supplies, and I won't bother you again," he insisted, clinging to the rope. "Wait then," Emerson said, turning towards the bedroom where the food was stored. I watched Emerson in disbelief and shouted, "Are you crazy? You're actually going to give him supplies?" The man outside the patio smiled joyfully, expressing his sincere thanks. Soon, Emerson came out with a bag of food and water. Before opening the patio door, he asked the man, "Do you have a gun?" The man shook his head earnestly, saying no. Emerson nodded, reaching to open the patio door, then whispered to me, "Stand behind the glass, don't interfere." He couldn't possibly be unarmed, but you still. Before I could finish, Emerson had already opened the patio door. As Emerson approached the man reached behind his back as if grabbing something. Suddenly, he pulled out a handgun. The moment the bullet was fired, Emerson quickly ducked, and the bullet hit the wall painting inside the house, shattering the glass framing the painting. At the same time, his rope snapped from above. The man fell, screaming continuously. I heard the horde of zombies howling downstairs, and with my eyes tightly shut, I could almost see the scene of a man falling from a height into the crowd of zombies and being devoured. A moment later, Emerson stood up calmly, took the bag of supplies, and went inside, closing the patio door behind him. Ezra returned a few minutes later. They exchanged a glance without speaking. I watched them both with some unease, feeling inexplicably mixed emotions. We had become murderers in this apocalyptic world, but at that moment, it was our only choice. Worried that the man might have accomplices, Emerson had me operate a drone to scout the upper floors. Ezra mentioned that when he had gone up earlier, there were signs that the place had been thoroughly searched. It seemed the man had planned to search downwards floor by floor for supplies, only to meet his end just as he reached our level. According to what Ezra said at the time, this man wasn't a resident of the 25th floor, so he must have come down from the rooftop garden. I flew the drone straight to the top floor, but apart from some withered plants, there were no signs of anything. The three of us exchanged puzzled looks. Let's check inside the 25th floor apartment, Emerson suggested. It's been raining these past few days, and apart from an indoor greenhouse, there was nowhere else to take shelter from the rain. Plus, it was cold. He would have frozen to death if he had stayed in the greenhouse or the hallway, I guess after breaking into the 25th floor. He made it his base. As the drone ascended, I noticed that the patio door of the 25th floor was wide open. Though I initially thought it was just ransacked by that man, I hadn't considered Emerson's point until then, so I immediately steered the drone through the patio door into the apartment. From the outside, it was unclear, but once inside, I found several tools on the dining table, including ropes, a few knives, and even 2 handguns, with several small ammunition boxes nearby. One of which was open and contained bullets wrapped in oil paper. This guy had quite an arsenal, I remarked, somewhat surprised. No, judging by the quantity, he definitely couldn't use all these knives and guns alone, so he must have had accomplices, Emerson said, frowning beside me. Where are his accomplices then? They couldn't still be in this building, could they? That's unlikely, they must be gone by now, otherwise they would have come out to help him when he was shouting outside earlier. Even the second time he came down here, they wouldn't have let him come alone. After all, he had already scoped us out and knew there were 3 of us and that we were armed. It's unlikely he would risk coming alone, Ezra analyzed. Emerson nodded. Let's check the rooms. I flew the drone into the rooms, but all the doors were closed tightly. Naturally, the drone couldn't enter. Maybe we should just leave it. I'll use the drone's mechanical arm to take down the weapons, I suggested. Seeing the situation, they didn't want to cause more trouble and nodded in agreement, so I used the drone's mechanical arm to gather all the weapons on the table into an open backpack, ready to leave. However, just as I was about to fly the drone back to the patio, I spotted an eye hidden behind the curtain in the corner of the patio through the drone's camera. The eye was filled with terror watching the drone. I almost slipped, controlling the drone's arm, and pointed at the eye on the screen to Emerson and Ezra. They were obviously surprised too. I steadied myself and slowly flew the drone towards the corner where the eye was located, maintaining a distance, and stopped in front of the eye. The owner of the eye slowly pulled back the curtain, revealing a small girl crouched in the corner behind the curtain, trembling and covered in blood, staring at the drone. She suddenly opened her mouth. "Are you the police uncle sent to rescue me?" I read her lips and relayed the message, Emerson, and I looked at Ezra, who seemed surprised and told us, "This little girl is the one I mentioned before, the one who lives on the 25th floor." The 3 of us discussed for a while and eventually decided to let Gustav go up. I flew the drone back first, unseen by us. The little girl's gaze followed the drone as it departed. She chased after the drone until she reached the edge of the terrace. Once the drone was out of sight, she curled up on the terrace, hugging her knees and quietly sobbing. The fire escape on the 25th floor was unlocked, and Finian easily pushed open the door. Ezra, controlling Finian, rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door of apartment 25 opened slightly. A timid little girl stood behind it, half hidden, eyeing Finian warily. "Are you a robot sent by the police uncle? Did the police uncle send you to save me and my parents?" "Where are your parents?" Finian's mechanical voice echoed in the hallway. The little girl stared at Finian for a long while before she stepped aside, opening the door wider to let him in. Once inside, she closed the door and, with a faltering step, led Finian slowly towards the master bedroom. The tightly shut door of the master bedroom was unlocked by the little girl using a key from her pocket. I gasped, for on the screen, we saw an unbelievable scene. A corpulent man was kneeling against the wall, his hands bound, with a Swiss Army knife piercing through his carotid artery in his neck. The blood that had spurted onto the wall and floor had long since dried. With eyes still fixed in terror on the ceiling, on the bed lay a naked woman, her face once beautiful, now frozen in an expression of twisted pain and despair, her eyes wide open in anger. The once white sheets were soaked red with blood. Both bodies showed signs of livor mortis. but perhaps due to the recent cold spell, there was no sign of decomposition. Tears filled the little girl's eyes as she turned to Finian and said, "My mommy and daddy are here. Can you help save them?" I was utterly shocked, unable to imagine what her parents had endured. Seeing the naive hope in the little girl's eyes weighed heavily on my heart. "They are already dead," Finian replied in a mechanical voice. I saw the light in the little girl's eyes gradually fade. Dimming as tears streamed down her face, she sobbed, I know. It was those two uncles. They killed my mommy and daddy. It was them. Is there anyone else in your home?" Finian asked. The girl cried and nodded, then shook her head. "There's another uncle in the guest room, but he's dead too." The other uncle fell down. "How did the uncle in the guest room die?" She shook her head. "I don't know. They were arguing very loudly in the guest room. One of them said he was going to throw my parents down from here, and I heard him say he would throw me down too. Then I hid in my parents' room, locked the door from inside, and kept the key in my pocket. They couldn't get in. They kept banging on the door, telling me to come out, but I didn't go out, and eventually, they stopped knocking." She paused. "I saw daylight 3 times from the room, then heard the uncles arguing again. One said there were 3 people on the 23rd floor with lots of food, but they had guns, so he asked the other uncle to go down with him, but he didn't want to. He wanted to wait here for rescue. Then, I heard a bang, and there was no more noise outside. Just now, I heard an uncle yelling outside, and I saw him fall from the window. I waited a long time in the room, not hearing any noise outside before daring to come out. No one was left in the house. I checked all the rooms, only to find the other uncle motionless in the guest room. Then, when I returned to the living room, I saw a small plane flying up. I hid behind the curtains, and after a while, it flew back in. I thought it was here to rescue me." She suddenly looked up. "Was that drone sent by you?" Finian nodded. "So, you really came to rescue me?" "Mommy and Daddy said the police uncle would save us." The little girl's eyes held a glimmer of hope. Finian nodded, then shook his head. "We are not the police, but we can save you. Are you willing to come with us?" Finian brought her safely to her house, where she, likely starved for days, sobbed as she devoured 2 servings of self-heating rice. We also learned her name, Haley. Her father was an executive at a publicly listed company in City A, and her mother was a typical wealthy housewife who stayed at home to take care of her. A week before the zombie outbreak, their housekeeper had taken leave for the spring festival to return to her hometown, leaving just her and her mother at home. On the night of the outbreak, her father brought 2 men home to discuss work matters. A dispute arose among the men, which involved talk of dealing with someone. Haley overheard bits and pieces, not understanding the details due to her young age. We could guess it wasn't anything reputable from her intermittent recounting, and we gradually pieced together the full story. That night, as the 2 men prepared to leave, zombies broke out in the neighborhood, preventing their departure. In the following days, since they had adequate supplies at home, everyone thought the national authorities would quickly handle the zombie incident, and nothing untoward occurred initially. However, as time passed and the city experienced cuts in water, electricity, and internet, with no further updates from the military, the household resources could no longer sustain 5 people. This led to the first major conflict in the post-apocalyptic setting, and her father was tied up in the master bedroom by the 2 men. Under these dire circumstances, the men's true, sinister natures emerged. They brutally humiliated her mother in front of her father. Haley mentioned that because her father kept shouting, which the men found annoying, they stabbed him in the neck with a knife. Her mother screamed continuously in the bedroom until her voice turned hoarse, eventually reduced to mere sobs. Haley watched through the crack of the bedroom door as these 2 devils committed their atrocities. She grabbed a kitchen knife, but as she was about to step into the bedroom, she saw her mother shaking her head at her, mouthing words of plea to run away. Ultimately, she did not intervene and helplessly witnessed her mother being violated and killed by the 2 demons. Afterwards, these 2 monsters, holding the tiny her in their arms, spoke in what she perceived as the most disgusting tone, coaxing her, "As long as you obey us, we will take care of you like our own daughter." She saw undisguised lust in the eyes of these men, and at just 12 years old, she learned what hatred meant in a single day. Yet, she dared not resist. Unsure of where to run, she knew the outside was dangerous, but her current home was equally perilous. Still, she wanted to stay by her parents' side. Thus, in the days that followed, she became a slave to these 2 men. Fortunately, as their supplies dwindled, the men lacked the energy to commit further atrocities, but they increasingly found her a burden and contemplated getting rid of her as well. After all that, everything happened, Emerson and Ezra comforted me, saying, "You can now be free of any guilt, for those we executed were not merely desperate survivors, but vile scum." Holding the gradually sleeping thin body in my arms, I felt a desolation within. She likely hadn't been able to sleep peacefully for a long time. It reminded me of a phrase I once saw online: hell is empty, and all the devils are here. Looking out at the increasingly moonlit night sky through the window, with intermittent low growls of zombies still audible from downstairs due to hunger, I couldn't help but wonder how many more people in this cursed apocalypse are enduring unimaginable hardships. It was at this moment I realized once again that in this apocalypse, the most terrifying thing is not the mindless zombies that bite on sight, nor the thrice mutated zombie that escaped from the lab, but the human heart. 72 days have passed since the day of the zombie outbreak. Haley's mood has greatly improved, and smiles are often seen on her face. Nico is a little kitten that respects the old and loves the young. Since Haley came to our home, she seemed to sense her unhappiness and would always stay close to her. Haley also grew fond of it, often sitting beside Ezra with Nico in her arms, watching Ezra work on his robots. She seemed to rely a lot on Ezra, mentioning how she used to run into him frequently in the elevator. Only when I looked at the calendar did I realize that the spring festival had already passed and spring had silently arrived. The weather was gradually becoming normal, carrying a hint of spring. Looking at the peacefulness in our home, I no longer felt the days were too hard to endure. However, Emerson was the most anxious person in our home, eagerly awaiting news from the military. His research on the virus had reached a stage where it could no longer be conducted at home. He would sit on the terrace for hours every day, hoping to spot military patrol or rescue aircraft. He even flew drones around the city daily, trying to locate the military's base in City A. Unfortunately, due to limited battery power and signal range of the drone, besides encountering hordes of zombies, he found nothing, not even a trace of the thrice-mutated zombie. After a week, he gave up. 3 months into the zombie outbreak, a military patrol aircraft shattered our peaceful day. By then, the potatoes I had planted had matured. Emerson and I were harvesting them on the terrace when the roaring sound of a helicopter caught our attention. It had been more than a month since the last message from the military about sending a rescue team. In the meantime, we hadn't received any further news, and we almost believed what Ezra had said about City A being abandoned as a test field, adopting a day-by-day survival attitude. So when the military helicopter appeared, both Emerson and I doubted if we were dreaming. Please, survivors, find a safe and visible high ground and wait there for rescue at 5 a.m. tomorrow. A soldier repeated several times through a megaphone from the helicopter, which then flew towards other residential areas. The rescue message echoed over City A, yet no joyful sounds could be heard from the city, only the restless howling of zombies on the streets. Although unsure about other survivors' conditions, this was undeniably good news, especially for Emerson. We decided to head straight to the rooftop garden the next morning, as it was the safest high ground nearest to us. That evening, to celebrate the impending good news, we indulged in a feast with many cans of meat, cooking the freshly harvested potatoes. Even Nico got to enjoy his favorite canned salmon and freeze-dried chicken breast. We even each heated a bucket of water for a warm bath since, after all, we wouldn't be able to take these supplies with us once rescued. Everyone soaked in anticipation throughout the night, except Haley, who seemed downcast. "What are you thinking about? The police uncle is coming to rescue us. Aren't you happy, Haley?" I approached her as she sat alone on the terrace, staring at the stars, and gently wrapped my arms around her slender shoulders. She shook her head, happy, but her expression did not seem so. "Are you thinking about your mom and dad?" She was silent, lowering her head, clearly touched on a sore spot. I sighed and hugged her closer, letting her sob quietly in my embrace. Turning my head towards the living room, Emerson was still soaking in the bath, and Ezra sat on the couch, staring blankly at a small family photo in his hands. I felt melancholic, realizing that in this harsh world, they were still just children needing the care and love of a family. I rested my head on Haley's small head, feeling more certain than ever about my decision. Going forward, it seemed they could only rely on Emerson and me. Silently, I pursed my lips and gazed at the distant sun. About 10 minutes later, we finally heard the roar of a helicopter. The helicopter started its search from the outermost top floor of the complex. While we were inside, in building number 8, the noise from above caused a huge disturbance among the zombies below, who were howling like wild beasts. Clutching the binoculars, I could barely make out the helicopter rescuing survivors from the 5th building. An elderly couple was slowly climbing up the rope ladder lowered by the helicopter, with a middle-aged couple helping them by holding the ladder from below. On the 6th building, there was only a dirty-looking young girl, about the same age as Ezra. The 7th building was empty, as were buildings 1 through 4. It seemed that only a handful of humans had survived in the entire complex. I felt a pang of melancholy and anxiously looked around, hoping it would soon be our turn. Ezra and Emerson were behind me, waving their arms to catch the helicopter's attention. I glanced at the little watch on Haley's wrist. It was already 5. 12:30 p.m., the commotion among the zombies downstairs was growing larger, and the street facilities emitted a strange, loud noise. Emerson and I exchanged glances, grabbed the binoculars, and leaned over the edge of the rooftop to look down. It was that thrice-mutated zombie, which had apparently followed the sound, unlike the other mindlessly charging zombies. It was looking up purposefully at the rescue helicopter, roaring and even attempting to stretch out its tendrils to grasp the helicopter, though it was far too distant. Then, it began to scan its surroundings and, finding the building walls, started to climb up using its tendrils. By then, the helicopter was already heading our way. The mutated zombie, while climbing, kept its eyes on the helicopter's movements, pausing to watch as the helicopter prepared to change direction, seemingly trying to figure out where it was headed. Emerson took the binoculars, frowned, and said, "It seems intelligent." The helicopter was less than half a minute away from us, and the creature had almost reached the top of the 7th building. I grabbed Emerson's arm. "Take Haley and Nico to the safe zone first. It's unlikely that all 4 of us can go together. Ezra and I will stay. We have Finian, and our home is relatively safe with supplies." "You're crazy. If anyone should stay, it should be me," he exclaimed. Staring at me in disbelief, I looked up at the slowly stabilizing helicopter about to lower its rope ladder and focused on Emerson. "You can help the country research the virus and develop antibodies and serums, but we can't. Also, Haley is too young to be with us. Going to the safe zone is the best option. Emerson, please listen to me." The rope ladder was now deployed, and the military and survivors on board were urging us to climb quickly. I placed Haley on the ladder first, and the survivors helped pull her up. Turning to look at Emerson, he was still staring stubbornly at me. I saw one of the monster's tendrils reaching the edge of the 7th building's roof. It likely intended to leap directly from there to our building, as the gap between buildings 7 and 8 wasn't wide, and its body could easily make the jump. Without time for further discussion with Emerson, I pushed him towards the ladder. "We'll wait for your good news at home." With that, I grabbed Ezra's hand and ran towards the fire escape. The moment we shut the fire escape door, the creature landed, swinging its grotesque tendrils toward the helicopter. Emerson was already safely aboard the helicopter, which quickly ascended, distancing itself from the creature. I could vaguely see Emerson's face at the window, his eyes red as he stared in my direction. This was the second time I saw him cry, the first being when his parents died. Ezra and I ran home, the fire escape door banging loudly behind us. At that moment, I no longer thought the property management fees we usually paid were too expensive. The quality of the door was really good, as the large, strong creature couldn't break it despite its efforts. Ezra and I finally made it home safely, both of us sitting on the foyer floor, catching our breath. "Do you blame me?" I asked after catching my breath. He shook his head. "My life was saved by you and your brother. I understand your decisions. Emerson has a mission to save lives. Having Haley with us would be a liability in case of danger. Staying behind, at least we still have Finian, which makes us somewhat safer. Sis, you were right. Thanks for trusting me." He leaned against the door with his arms crossed behind his head, his tone becoming somewhat indifferent. "Besides, there are probably lots of refugees in the safe zone, and it's hard to say whether we can get any good food. I think we'd be more comfortable staying at our place." He made me laugh. After calming my heartbeat, I walked to the patio door and pulled down the blackout curtain. The moment the curtain closed, I saw the head of that monster stretch down from above. I was so frightened that I didn't dare to breathe and turned around, signaling Ezra to be quiet with a gesture before we left. We had turned off the power in the house, so the electric fence outside was not live. Ezra must have guessed something, and he turned around, leaning against the wall to switch on the circuit breaker at the entrance. About a minute later, I heard the electric fence being struck by something huge, making a loud clanging noise. Soon after, there was a heart-wrenching scream, followed 3 seconds later by a loud boom downstairs. Ezra and I exchanged glances, and after realizing what was happening, we both leaned over the window and pulled out our binoculars to look down. The monster had fallen to the ground due to electrocution, creating a crater in the road with its massive body and weight, with several regular zombies crushed into mud beneath it. I couldn't help but marvel. Human ingenuity truly is powerful. Ezra and I watched for a while until about 10 minutes later, the monster slowly got up from the ground, moving its limbs in an even more twisted and bizarre manner. One of its tentacles had snapped off and lay on the ground. Now it only had 3 left. Wow, is it trying to be a 9-tailed fox? Each tail represents a life, so does each tentacle represent one too? It didn't die even after falling from the 23rd floor. It really is something. Its head slowly started turning again, and it looked up. Ezra and I quickly ducked below the window, exchanging glances. Did it see us? I don't think so. Did it? Ezra and I crouched by the window, not daring to move. After about 10 minutes of silence outside, we slowly got up, and just as we did, we came face to face with the monster, separated only by the glass window and the wire mesh. We couldn't hold back this time, damn it. It did see us earlier. Our screams filled the room, while the monster outside stared at us with its eyes rolling around for quite some time, as if clinging to the wall without the wire mesh to peer inside our room. Its gaze gradually turned ferocious, its desire to devour us unmasked. Then it reached out another tentacle, attempting to claw through the wire mesh. Half a minute later, boom, we were stunned for a moment, and by the time we came to, the outside was already empty. We then took our binoculars and looked down again, and sure enough, the monster had fallen again, inevitably crushing a few more zombies. And now only 2 tentacles were left. We were silent for a long time. Didn't Emerson say this thing was intelligent? Maybe. It has the intelligence of a 6-year-old. It sure doesn't seem very smart. It looks like we can really just relax at home now. 31, perhaps discouraged by its consecutive failures and heavy bleeding, the monster wisely chose not to challenge our wire mesh again. With Ezra's efforts, the voltage on the wire mesh was significantly increased, enough to electrocute a normal person to death, so we didn't even bother to draw the curtains anymore. Each of us opened a can of chips, kicked back with our legs crossed on the couch, and played Switch together. This is the right way to survive the apocalypse, isn't it? What were all those days of anxiety for? When Super Mario successfully rescued the princess on the TV screen, an eerie silence returned outside. I turned my head and looked outside with a disdainful glance at the monster staring at us, and nudged Ezra with my elbow. This guy still hasn't given up. I think he might as well turn on the zombies downstairs and eat them. He could be doing us a public service, Ezra said, stuffing a chip into his mouth, and the monster outside weakly howled. Both of us were startled by its reaction. Is it trying to be cute? My expression resembled the well-known meme of the confused black man, or maybe it's acting coy. Ezra looked equally puzzled, imagining the monster acting cute in front of me. A burly beast with 2 long tentacles, resembling a zombie version of a gibbon, stomped its muscular legs, causing the floor in front of me to tremble 3 times. I shivered, a chill running down my spine. The monster howled again, its eyes filled with a pitiful longing as it stared at us intently. Stop looking at us like that. We're not going to feed ourselves to you, I bluffed, shouting fiercely at it. I thought I saw it hang its head low. And Ezra, opening the patio door, threw it a chip. Here, eat, something tastier than human flesh, barbecue flavored. I was speechless, but the sight of the monster catching the chip with its mouth wide open left me even more speechless. I was so shocked I almost couldn't catch my jaw. Ezra looked at me smugly, raising an eyebrow. See, I understand it. Well, you can be brothers with it then. For the rest of the night, Ezra sat on the patio feeding the monster chips, opening 2 cans throughout the evening. It was somewhat reminiscent of an old man happily feeding fish by a lake, even wanting to chat with the fish. For instance, "Are you thirsty? You've eaten so many chips already," he said as he walked into the house to grab a squirt gun. "Want some water, bro? Want more? I've still got a bucket of original flavor. Do you like those?" He re-entered the house, grabbed a bucket of original flavor chips, and refilled the squirt gun. As he watered its gaping mouth, he threw in some chips. Don't let it drink all the water. A zombie eating chips is one thing, but drinking water too? Ridiculous. I finished washing up and it was already 11. He was still amusing himself with that creature on the balcony. Unable to bear it any longer, I yelled, "Hurry up and get ready for bed. Or else don't even think about feeding it chips tomorrow. I'll make you starve with it." "All right, bro, we'll continue tomorrow. That's it for today. My sister's freaking out." "You scared?" The creature didn't speak but kept its eyes desperately on the half bucket of chips in his hands. "Yeah, scared, right. Time to go." The next morning when I woke up, I was surprised to find the creature was once again punctually staring into our house from the window. I dragged Ezra out of sleep and pointed to the pitiful creature outside the window, urging him to come up with a solution quickly. The creature carried the stench of rotting flesh, and just from being perched at the window last night, it had already stunk up the place. I couldn't understand how Ezra could tolerate that stench and play with it all night, especially since it smelled even worse today. Their rotting stench is truly unbearable. "It gets worse each day," I said, pinching my nose. Ezra had just woken up and clearly hadn't adjusted to the polluted air yet, covering his nose. "It really stinks." Seeming to understand our complaints, the creature started making pitiful howling sounds, looking rather pathetic. "Stop howling. You've still got breath." My God. I turned away, overwhelmed by the stench, and waved at Ezra. "Hurry up and drive it away." He blew his nose, then went to the storage room to get 3 bags of chips and a few cans of Nico's salmon. planning to hang them on the clothesline and hand them out. Unexpectedly, the creature suddenly straightened up, revealing its entire face, with a headless zombie hanging from its mouth, its lips stained dark blue. Ezra and I uncontrollably started to retch as the creature, looking confused, tried to offer us the headless zombie's body. Ezra, after catching his breath, walked closer and gestured, "Bro, we don't eat this, we don't want this. We don't like it, you eat it." The creature seemed to understand and turned its head, loosening its grip, and the zombie's body fell down from the 23rd floor. Damn it, hearing the body smack against the ground, I felt a sudden sympathy for these ordinary zombies for a second. Such a brutal food chain. It turned back, its face excited again, looking at the snacks in Ezra's hand. Ezra then laid down some ground rules. "I can give this to you, but you can't keep coming here, only once a day. Take it and go eat, got it? If not, you get nothing, if you understand. Nod your head like I do," he demonstrated by nodding his head slowly. Unexpectedly, the creature actually nodded at Ezra, apparently learning quickly, and then continued nodding in a bid to please, although its stiff and twisted body made the nodding appear strangely slow and awkward, its body swaying slightly with the motion of its head. It looked like those bobblehead toys kids love to play with outside supermarkets. Ezra extended the snack bags with the clothesline to its mouth, and it gently took them, looking like the Alaskan Malamute on the 15th floor known for fetching deliveries for its owner. After Ezra retracted the clothesline, it gave Ezra a strange, yet non-threatening smile with its dark blue lips and slowly clambered down the wall. Ezra and I leaned over the window with binoculars, watching as it climbed down with the bag in its mouth, sitting under the big banyan tree by the community lake. Childlike, tearing open the packaging in cans with its mouth, it held the chips with its tentacles, pouring them into its mouth, while continuously licking the salmon can with its tongue. We watched like we were viewing a nature documentary on TV. They kept discussing animatedly, "I can't believe it even opened the package to eat. I thought it would just eat it with the wrapping on," I said, somewhat surprised. "It just proves again that it has intelligence and can understand our speech," Ezra said, resting his chin on his hand. After the monster had its fill, it carelessly tossed the packaging onto the ground. "Not very environmentally friendly," I commented. Indeed, this kid still needs some training. I'll give it a good lesson when it comes to pick up its food tomorrow," he mused thoughtfully. We were fervently discussing how to educate it, oblivious to the fact that, having eaten its fill, it was aimlessly wandering the streets just like any other ordinary zombie. Apparently bored, however, unlike the others, it acted like a mischievous child, occasionally using its tentacles to slap other zombies on the head. The zombies that got slapped would awkwardly turn towards it without moving their bodies. Most ordinary zombies would just take a glance and then ignore it since they realized it was one of their own kind, but a few seemed slower to react, mistaking the slap for some activity. They would rush towards it. It would just stand there, watching as they approached, and at the last moment, it would entangle them with its tentacles and munch on them until they were nothing but tattered corpses. "This kid is kind of brutal," I remarked. "That's great. Let's add a new rule to the training plan. Make it clean up the zombie horde downstairs every day. We can also teach it to count, and give it an extra can of food for reaching a certain number," he said enthusiastically. Almost proud of his seemingly perfect plan, I was speechless. Reminded of how I used to train my dog Nico to catch mice, but the stench of decay is really getting stronger by the day. Thankfully, we're on the 23rd floor, so it hasn't reached us yet. If we were living on a lower floor, it would be unbearable. I recalled the nauseating stench with disgust. Decay is normal. They are, after all, the living dead. Death by decay is just a matter of time. What do you think? If the military doesn't clean up, would they just decay and die eventually? It has been over 3 months now. Who knows how long it will take for them to decay to death? If it takes 2 or 3 years, what will become of us? The city needs to resume functioning as soon as possible, and people need to get back to their normal lives. Ezra rolled his eyes at me as if I was simple-minded. "Sis, you have a boyfriend like me, yet you still think like a child. I think your mental age might not be far off from that monster's," he said, nodding towards the creature downstairs. "Get lost." Day 98 of the zombie outbreak, and the stench of decay was overwhelming, thanks largely to that zombie monster. Since Ezra had educated it, more like brainwashed, it had been diligently killing zombies every day. After clearing our complex, it started rampaging through nearby streets. It even began piling the zombie corpses near the big banyan tree in our complex. "Maybe you should give it a new task, have it move these bodies to the landfill outside the city. Keeping them piled up downstairs isn't ideal. At this rate, exterminating the whole city is just a matter of time. Its method of killing one and dragging it back isn't working," I said, observing through binoculars the 2 small hills of zombie corpses accumulating downstairs. Feeling worried. "Good idea," Ezra agreed. So the next day, when it came up to get its food, Ezra had it follow a drone to familiarize itself with the route to the suburban landfill. At first, it didn't understand what the drone was and found it amusing, swatting my drone to smithereens with a slap. Reluctantly, I brought out my second drone. "This is my last one. Don't let it sweat it like a mosquito again. Drones aren't cheap. Don't worry," Ezra reassured confidently. I watched anxiously as he trained the monster, hoping that my second drone wouldn't meet a heroic end. Fortunately, having been scolded just before, it remembered that the drone was not to be touched. After understanding the instructions, it slowly followed the drone's flight path on the ground from the 23rd floor, looking somewhat strained, as if remembering the route was challenging. I controlled the drone, leading it towards the landfill on the outskirts. But as we neared an old residential building, it stopped in its tracks, its expression turning from blank to pained. Ezra and I watched curiously through the drone's transmitted video. I silently flew the drone a bit higher, putting a safer distance between it and the creature to avoid a crash. It took about 5 minutes for it to recover from the intense pain, tears inexplicably streaming from its eyes. It seemed to be unaware of what was happening to itself, as it slowly extended a tentacle to gently touch its own cheek. Looking puzzled at the tears it found there, "It's actually crying. Can zombies even cry?" I exclaimed in shock. "It has intelligence, and with intelligence comes emotions. Perhaps that's why it's crying. But what made it cry?" Ezra furrowed his brows, equally confused. I gazed at the dilapidated apartment building on the screen, hesitantly suggesting, could it be that this place used to be its home when it was still human? Ezra turned to look at me sharply for a moment, then, as if a light bulb went off, said, "That's very likely." The zombie then slowly moved into the building, confirming my guess. Its movements were slow but purposeful. It went straight to a room at the end of the 3rd floor. The door lock was broken, and the door was slightly ajar. Surprisingly, it didn't force the door open, but gently pushed it. Inside, the furnishings were old and sparse, barely a studio with just a double bed, a desk, and a wooden wardrobe. There were signs of disturbance, likely from someone breaking in after the outbreak. It paused at the door, staring into the room, tears streaming down its face. I maneuvered the drone inside the room and noticed some papers held down by a pencil case on the worn desk. Zooming in, we saw a human experimentation agreement, with a critical condition notice partially obscured next to it. From my years of working in a hospital, I recognized it immediately. The agreement listed Emerson's Research Institute and a person named Giselle. It stood in the doorway for a long time, then fell into profound agony, shaking its head repeatedly. Nearly 10 minutes later, its expression reverted to its previously emotionless state. It slowly walked away from the building filled with its human memories, wandering aimlessly in the streets, no longer following the drone to the dump, indifferent even as the drone circled overhead. "It must be because of that agreement." "Right," Ezra said, watching the screen, his voice tinged with pity. I remained silent. Emerson had never mentioned human experimentation at the Institute to me. I guess he probably didn't know, or he would have recognized this particular mutant zombie at first sight and told us. The only explanation was that it was a secret experiment by the Institute's higher-ups. I sighed, watching its figure, and initiated the drone's return. We thought it would be back to normal the next day, hanging around our balcony asking for food as usual, but for several days we saw neither hide nor hair of it, and the pile of zombie bodies remained downstairs. Even sending out drones to search yielded no sign of it, except for the increasingly intense stench of decay. Our days returned to a semblance of calm. This continued until the 106th day of the zombie outbreak, over half a month since Emerson and Gregory were rescued. Finally, military helicopters arrived again, this time several in succession. Ezra and I exchanged glances, seeing understanding and relief in each other's eyes. This time, it seemed a significant cleanup operation was underway, likely a successful outcome from the research. About 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock and the final beep of the fingerprint door, with the announcement, "Fingerprint correct, door unlocked." Emerson appeared in the entranceway, wearing his lab coat. For a moment, I was dazed, as if he had just left for the Institute for work as usual, returning home in his work clothes after completing a new research project, smiling at me as I rushed to embrace him. "Georgia," his familiar call snapped me back to reality, tears uncontrollably streaming down my face, not quite like before. As I flung myself into his arms, he stroked my head, chuckling softly. "We can soon return to normal life. The research was very successful." Holding him, I buried my head in his chest, the smell still that familiar scent of disinfectant, albeit unpleasant. Despite everything, it still gave me a sense of peace. This time you're here to carry out the extermination, right? I heard Ezra say. Yes, we're also using City A for a large-scale experiment. Subsonic waves can indeed have a very intense effect on zombies, even allowing us to eliminate them without using military ammunition and without damaging any of the city's structures. It's the best way to eradicate the zombies. Then why did you come back too? I asked, lifting my head. I'm one of the main developers, so I need to oversee the use of the equipment and provide assistance, also, to evacuate you all to a safe zone. After all, subsonic waves can also have a severe impact on humans. So you can't stay here any longer. The military has also sent more rescue teams to save the survivors who haven't been evacuated from the city yet. As we were packing up, I suddenly thought of the disappeared mutant zombie. Do you know, has your institute conducted any human experiments? I asked Emerson, who was helping me pack. He looked at me puzzled, clearly unaware. Human experiments? Our institute has never publicly conducted human experiments. That's not allowed. Only drug trials are permitted, which involve side effects testing before a drug is marketed, but those are usually public. What's up? I told Emerson everything I had seen that day, and he was somewhat shocked. So you suspect that the zombie virus might have been caused by human research in your institute? I nodded and then shook my head. At first, I thought so, but then I remembered. Wasn't the initial zombie virus found to have started from animals, or perhaps from water sources? I just feel there must be some connection, but I can't figure out what it is. I really don't know about this. Maybe my clearance isn't high enough. If, as you suggest, our institute did conduct human experiments, then it would only be possible as part of a top-level research plan. The helicopter outside started to blare its horn, seemingly urging us, let's head to the safe zone first. We can't figure anything out right now, Ezra said, putting on his backpack and holding the small ancient artifact. Standing at the door, Emerson and I stopped talking and sped up our packing. By the time we safely got onto the rescue chopper from the top floor, it was almost dark. Looking down at City A in the sunset, my thoughts were still in turmoil. If this virus was man-made, even if the city regained order, what would happen if such situations arose again? Could peace truly last? From the helicopter, we could vaguely see lines of military trucks entering City A. It's really strange. They said zombies have a survival cycle of at least a year, yet it's only been 3 months, and there aren't many zombies left in City A, just heaps of bodies, the pilot said, conversing with the co-pilot. I find it strange too, but aside from City A, other cities still have plenty of zombies, the co-pilot responded, looking down with binoculars, before turning to ask us. Those heaps are mostly around your neighborhood. Do you know what happened? Ezra and I looked at each other and disclosed everything, excluding the human experiment agreement. Surprise was evident on their faces, as we had expected. That makes our cleanup of City A and the rescue much easier. Where is that mutant zombie now? The pilot asked. I shook my head. I don't know. Haven't seen it since last week. That's too bad. If we could capture it, it could replace the military in the cleanup and make things much safer and easier, the co-pilot remarked from his seat. Hearing this, the pilot was silent for a while, then turned on the military communication equipment inside the helicopter. This is B-1-47 rescue helicopter. This is B-1-47 rescue helicopter, according to the survivors. There is a thrice mutated zombie in the city. Please be cautious. A reply came immediately. Received. Mr. Lin has already reported to our side. Please ensure safety and secure the survivors' safe arrival at the safe zone. We had been flying for nearly 2 hours when we safely arrived at the secure zone, where Gregory and Nico greeted us. Gregory, holding Nico, complained to me, Sister, the little cat has been behaving badly lately. He refuses to eat dry food since we ran out of canned food. Nico struggled to jump into my arms. I took Nico and looked around. The survival area was enclosed by walls, even at the top level, accessible only to the military management via an elevator. We had just descended from the rooftop helipad. Inside the survival area, tents of survivors filled the space, with military dormitories at the center. It felt like a mini enclosed city. I heard this was only Survival Zone C. Many other zones were spread across different cities, each capable of accommodating thousands of people, which showed that many were still desperately trying to survive. You two are the new survivors from City A. Right, I'm a volunteer here. Just call me Hope. Shall I show you around? My thoughts were interrupted by a girl in a yellow volunteer vest, her hair tied back in a ponytail. We followed Hope around the survival area, and she explained the rules and general solutions for needs along the way. This zombie outbreak, we managed to rescue less than 100,000 survivors. This virus is truly terrifying, Hope said regretfully as she led the way. Then why didn't the military send help sooner? I heard there were signs of this happening much earlier, Ezra commented disdainfully, clearly blaming the slow rescue efforts. Hope, sensing the accusation in his words, turned around and looked at Ezra with some anger. How can you say that? The military's response was very quick. Setting up these many survival zones takes time. Moreover, the military started the rescue operations just 20 days after the outbreak. It's just that, Hope's voice broke into a sob, unable to finish her sentence. I stopped Ezra, who was also getting heated. Just what? Did something happen? Tears streamed down Hope's face as she choked up. When the military sent out the rescue teams, they were surrounded by zombies. There were too many of them to break through, and even with protective measures, the soldiers couldn't withstand the zombie onslaught, one after another. They were infected and assimilated by the zombies. Nearly 3 squads were completely lost, so that's why the military had to adjust their plans. Ezra fell silent. I hope you won't speak like that again, and I hope you can trust our country more. Without its citizens, there is no country. The country has been trying hard, and so have our soldiers, Hope said, her eyes filled with sorrow as she stared at Ezra. I later learned that Hope's father was also among the soldiers lost. For several days, I didn't see Emerson. Life in the safe zone was mundane and boring, filled with chatting with the elderly survivors or doing manual labor in the volunteer group. Because the volunteers took a liking to Finian, Ezra joined the volunteers as well. Do you think they can find that zombie that mutated 3 times? Ezra asked while recording today's food distribution for the survivors, making conversation. I don't know. I shook my head, even if it hides. With the citywide release of infrasound weapons, I doubt it would survive. After a moment of silence, Ezra spoke somberly. Actually, I think a zombie like that, working hard for the people, wouldn't be too bad. Isn't it also a worker, just like us? That can't happen. Even if it seems harmless to us, the country wouldn't allow it. It's still a zombie, still bloodthirsty. The country would only completely eradicate anything that could threaten its people. I took the form from his hand to summarize it, while he sat beside me lost in thought. Our contemplation was interrupted by a commotion from the center of the safe zone. I could faintly hear people excitedly shouting, "The military is back victorious. When can we live back in the city? Have all the zombies been exterminated?" Standing outside the volunteer tent, the crowd parted to make way for the military, and a man who appeared to be a high-ranking officer approached me. "Are you Georgia Ensign Ezra?" he asked. Ezra and I glanced at each other and nodded. "Come with us." What happened? I didn't see Emerson and felt vaguely uneasy. Did something happen to Emerson? The officer leading the way looked back at me and replied, "Professor Lin is fine. We'll talk once we get there." He led us into the military's conference room where an elderly man with a white beard, wearing the same white lab coat as Emerson, sat at the head of the long conference table. His back to us and his expression stern. They gestured for us to sit down, and only then did the old man turn his chair to face us. "Hello, I am Everett, head of the Capital's Secret Research Group. You can call me Professor Felix," he began, his tone and voice carrying a gravity. Before we could speak, he continued, "We asked you here to discuss the triple mutant zombie you encountered. You know quite a bit about it, don't you?" His eagle-like gaze fixed on our eyes, making me feel uneasy. "We know some, but not much," Ezra replied from beside me, briefly recounting our recent experiences, but he deliberately omitted the matter of the human body agreement. We had carefully considered that since the agreement was confidential, it was safest to pretend ignorance. Professor Felix nodded, his hands clasped together on the table. "We have located it now, but we need your help." "Help? Can't you kill it?" I asked, surprised. The infrasound waves eliminated the regular zombies in the city, but they were not as effective against this one, and when our armed forces entered the city for a final sweep, they found it in the fire escape of your building. We can't fight it in your stairwell, and regular bullets can't deal it a fatal blow, not even headshots, so we lost half a squad, the officer who had been standing at the side added. Ezra and I exchanged shocked glances. "In our stairwell, what can we do to help?" I asked. "Based on what you've said, it likely won't attack you. We hope you can help us try to capture it." Ezra and I were still bewildered when we were forcibly taken to the helicopter heading to City A. The conversation with Professor Felix replayed in my mind. "Can we refuse?" I ventured. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, but you can't. It's okay, sis," Ezra reassured me, squeezing my hand. In the helicopter's rearview mirror, I saw the officer's eyes staring at us. The helicopter soon arrived at our building's rooftop. The rooftop garden had been cleared to make room for a huge iron cage. "We need you to lure it into the cage," the officer said after placing us on the rooftop, handing us a plastic bag filled with chips and canned food. "Why can't you lure it yourself? You already know it likes these," I argued out of fear. "We tried, but it still only attacks us, and what if it attacks us too?" He smiled. "Then we'll figure out something else." His implication was clear: if we died, then so be it. I trembled with anger. Ezra, who had been silent, then asked, "Can we have a drone?" The officer took a drone from the helicopter and handed it to Ezra, then returned to the helicopter. The helicopter rose slightly, and a rope ladder was lowered. "If it attacks you, you can climb the ladder, and we'll fly you away. If it successfully enters the cage, we will also control the gate to close it. So, good luck." "I know. If we don't make it to the top in time, we'll die here. What should we do?" I asked Ezra, who was already fiddling with the drone. "We've trained it to recognize drones. I'm thinking of using the drone to lure it here, but isn't our position unsafe? What if it really attacks us? We have nowhere to hide." Ezra took off his protective suit, revealing a climbing rope wrapped around his waist. "Do you have the keys, the ones to our house?" I nodded. Carrying the keys to our house with me at all times, even in the safe zone, as I was accustomed to. "First, we'll climb onto the rope, and if it attacks us when we lure it to the rooftop, we'll just slide down to my apartment on the 25th floor. He secured the rope and began to lower it. "We can't trust these people anymore." After securing both ropes, he said, "Once we get to my place, we'll run back to yours." "Okay." While agreeing, I flipped over the edge of the rooftop and grabbed the rope. Ezra began operating the drone, which moved down through the open fire escape door on the top floor and spotted it on the 20th floor. It was curled up in the fire escape. Startled by the noise of the drone, it slowly lifted its head to look at the drone and stood up. Only then I noticed that it had only one tentacle left, its body riddled with bullet holes and bullets embedded in its flesh. The drone's camera transmitted the scene in real time. It stared blankly at the drone, slowly stretched out its remaining tentacle, and gently tapped it, forming a small fist. "It must have guessed it's us, right?" I said, watching its response on the screen. "Turn the drone around a few times to signal to it, then fly up and see if it follows." Following my instructions, Ezra maneuvered the drone, and sure enough, it followed. It recognized us. I felt a mix of surprise and nervousness. The drone slowly flew to the top floor, and it followed, step by step, reaching the rooftop. My heart was pounding, barely daring to breathe as I watched the scene through the drone. The next second, its massive body appeared at the rooftop fire escape. Ezra held his breath and flew the drone inside a cage. It stared at the drone inside the cage for a long while, then suddenly turned its head towards us. We watched intently as Ezra threw some chips and canned food towards the cage. "Good buddy, your favorites." Then he whispered to me, "Get ready." It slowly moved towards the cans and chips on the ground, shaking its head at us in a bizarre, mechanical manner. Then its long tentacle, still clenched in a fist, stretched towards us. As I was about to slide down, its tentacle stopped just 2 fists distance away at the rooftop railing. The clenched tentacle opened, revealing several crumpled papers lying quietly inside. It kept staring at us, seemingly waiting for us to take the papers. I saw a look of pleading and anticipation in its lifeless eyes. Compelled, I reached out and took the papers from its hand. Before I could unfold the papers, it suddenly charged towards us. At that moment, Ezra and I both ducked and slid down, kicking off the edge of the 25th floor balcony and quickly dropping into the balcony below. As we landed on the 25th floor balcony, I saw its tentacle reach down first, followed by its body falling straight past our balcony. Ezra and I exchanged glances, then scrambled up to peer over the balcony edge. Its tentacle clung desperately to the electrified wire mesh on my 24th floor apartment. The electricity was still on from when we left in a hurry, urged by the rescue team. The expression on its face was one of extreme pain, yet it stubbornly clung to the electrified wire mesh. The smell of its scorched body gradually wafted up, the stench unbearable, nearly making me vomit. A helicopter had already circled from the rooftop to above us. With great effort, it turned to glance at the helicopter in the sky, and its mouth slowly formed a few syllables, "Man, scum," before it finally rested its head against the wire mesh. In less than 30 seconds, its entire body was charred by the electric current, and it eventually fell to its death from the 24th floor. I picked up the binoculars hanging around my neck and looked down. Several military trucks had already driven into the complex below, gathering around its body for inspection, apparently confirming its death. They dragged its body onto a large truck. Ezra and I sat by the terrace, still in shock from the drastic events. I looked at the somewhat charred bundle of papers in my hand and unfolded it. The first piece was a critical illness notification, inside which was a photo of a woman. The notification listed advanced malignant lymphoma as the condition. The patient's name was Genevieve, and her emergency contact was her husband, Giselle. The woman in the photo had lost her hair due to chemotherapy, but it didn't diminish her radiant smile at the camera. The second piece was a crumpled note with many misspellings and twisted handwriting, some of which I couldn't even recognize. Ezra and I struggled to make sense of the note. Please help me find my wife. The virus was brought by an old man. He gave me a lot of money to save my wife. He turned me into a monster, making me harm many innocent people. I heard they want to capture me alive. I will leave on my own. Please, help me. Closing the note, I finally understood its actions. It had probably spent those missing days searching for its memories. It didn't attack us and waited to give us the items because it trusted only us. We finally realized that those people didn't want to kill it. They merely wanted to capture it alive for further research. It, however, did not wish to be subjected to more experiments, so it ultimately chose to end its life. My eyes stung with tears, my heart filled with sorrow, and even more than sorrow, I felt disgust towards that old man Everett. He was the one who had turned the city into this, and yet, for his selfish desires, he disregarded the safety of the people to continue his research. We can't give these things to them. We need to hand them over to the real government, Ezra said next to me, his tone full of indignation. I pocketed the note and even took a photo of it as a backup. The officer in the helicopter used a loudspeaker to call out to us, "Come up to the roof, we can go back to the safe zone." The atmosphere inside the helicopter was tense, the officer's expression grave and his complexion poor. He was wearing a communication headset, shouting angrily at someone on the other end. The muffled voice was hard to discern, but I guessed he was arguing with Professor Everett. After the communication ended, the officer's tone towards us was very unfriendly. "What did that monster give you? Hand it over," he snapped at us, venting his frustration. I pulled out the fake note I had just written and the critical illness notification and handed them to him. The note read, "Please help me find my wife, thank you." He glanced at it, uttered a curse, and crumpled the note. Throwing it out the window, 39, after reaching the safe zone, Everett demanded that we keep the matter confidential. Even if higher authorities inquired, he would take responsibility if anything went wrong. "If you talk, it wouldn't be strange for two ordinary people to die in such an apocalypse." He was blatantly threatening us, so externally, we assured him with thumping chests, while behind his back, we cursed him through and through. Jokingly, I thought to myself, not informing the higher-ups would just fulfill this damn disastrous old man's wishes, wouldn't it? Giselle would have died in vain then. That night, in the tent, Ezra and I quietly discussed our strategy to report the incident when Emerson, who had been missing for a few days, returned. His eyes were red with fatigue. He pulled me into his arms and said with heartfelt concern, "I'm sorry for putting you at risk." "Did you know about all this?" I asked. "Well, they sent you guys to capture that thrice-mutated zombie. Luckily, they killed it. If something had happened to you..." "Wait," I interrupted him. "They killed it." He looked at me somewhat confusedly and nodded. "Isn't it dead?" I signaled to Ezra with a glance, and he understood. Stepping out of the tent, moments later, he pulled back the curtain and spoke to us. "It's clear, you can speak now." I then explained the whole situation to Emerson in detail. Emerson's expression changed from confusion to surprise and anger. "I understand. I'll figure something out." He took the original note from my hand and pocketed it. The next day, I asked the volunteers who had worked at the hospital mentioned in the critical condition notice about Genevieve in the safety zone, while Emerson had disappeared somewhere again. Genevieve, I think I know her. Isn't she the patient with malignant lymphoma?" "Yes, that's her. Do you know her?" "Do you know where she is now?" I had almost exhausted the volunteers with questions, but finally, I found someone who knew. "I'm not sure." She shook her head. "She was transferred to the survival zone quite early, which was lucky for her. Her condition worsened last month, and she was taken away by the management. Maybe she was moved for treatment." I thanked her, planning to later ask Emerson or someone from the management. Just then, there was a disturbance at the military section. This disturbance was much larger than the one that had taken us away that day. This time, it wasn't among the crowd, but it originated from within the military's administrative area. The administrative area was surrounded by people in concentric circles, all buzzing with discussions about what had happened. Two military-dressed personnel once again brought me and Ezra into the administrative center in the middle of the safety zone. Emerson's actions were swift. He stood by the side in the conference room, while that old man Everett and the officer who had been shouting at us were handcuffed and pushed to the ground, facing the leader I had always seen on the news. Everett, handcuffed on the ground, stubbornly argued, "I was contributing to the evolution of humanity. Why are you arresting me? You should be thanking me. His white hair was disheveled, his expression nearly manic. Those were my great masterpieces. The officer, also handcuffed, was kneeling on the ground begging. I was deceived by Professor Felix. Please, believe me, nation. I couldn't help but spit in the face of this man trying to dissociate himself. Shameless. He glared at me furiously. Bitch, those monsters don't attack you. You must be in league with them. I found it somewhat amusing, indeed. We are a team, that's how we know your true nature is nothing but scum, a disgrace to the people and the nation. The two crazed men were still kneeling and ranting until the leader, standing there, tired of their antics, waved his hand, and someone dragged them away. I sincerely apologize for the risks to the people caused by our nation's oversight. He bowed to us, I assure you, and I promise the people, that the nation will restore normal order within the next half-month. Day 162 of the zombie outbreak, 1 month since the nation restored normal order. Haley was sent to her surviving aunt's home, and Ezra, because of his development of the ancient remedy, was scouted by a top domestic university and granted admission to one of our nation's renowned universities. I asked him why he didn't continue going abroad. He said that now he only wanted to contribute to the motherland, plus abroad was in total chaos now. Their progress in dealing with zombies nowhere near as effective as ours. Emerson also got promoted and moved up the ranks. Emerson, Ezra, and I stood in front of a row of tombstones, each of us holding a large bunch of white gardenias. The names on the tombstones were sequentially arranged. My and Emerson's parents, added in the past month, were Ezra's parents and his young brother, and finally, Giselle and Genevieve. Ezra and I bowed deeply to Giselle's tombstone. I'm truly, truly sorry. I failed your trust, this I said in my heart. Going back to the night Everett was captured, I remembered Emerson's eyes filled with sorrow. Genevieve is dead. She was taken away by the management due to her worsening condition and handed over to Everett. Everett, relentless, used her for live experiments again. They tried to recreate another Giselle, but it failed, and so, she died on the spot. The nation thoroughly investigated the source of the virus during these days. Everett conducting live research was one reason, and the ultimate cause of water contamination spreading to various cities was because his activities were not merely personal research, but also involved collusion with the management of another country. His original plan was to destroy our country, after which that country would take him away. Hence, he placed part of the virus's source material into the water reservoirs of various cities. However, his plan didn't succeed because that country was too overwhelmed with its own issues to spare the effort to extract him, and the official at that time was indeed deceived by Everett. As we walked out of the cemetery, the sun was nearly setting, casting the sky in clouds in a fiery red hue, a rare sight of a burning cloud. Do you know, an evening sky with burning clouds means the next day will be good weather, I remarked, looking up at the evening glow. Filled with wonder, tomorrow will be a good day. Yes, a good day.